All right. Good afternoon, council members and members of the public joining us for this meeting. I am Giselle Sanchez. I am the statewide policy specialist here at CalICH, and I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you for your commitment in our shared efforts to prevent and end homelessness in California, and for joining us today. A few reminders before we begin. This is a 3-hour meeting, and while we'll do our best to keep to this time frame, there is a possibility we may go over that timing slightly. Prior to this meeting, council members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. We will try to leave some time for council members to ask general questions for the end of the meeting, but if we run out of the time, please feel free to reach out to CalICH staff with any questions after the meeting. For today's meeting, we have our call to order, tribal land acknowledgement, and roll call. We'll move on to our consent calendar. Then we'll go to our council co-chair opening remarks, followed by executive officer updates, and followed by the advisory committee updates, and then lived experience advisory board updates, council member updates. Then at the end, we'll have general public comments and our final remarks and adjournment. I will now pass it to our Secretary of Tribal Affairs, Secretary Christina Schneider-Ashtari, to read the tribal land acknowledgement.
Yahui, Chimai, Christina Schneider-Ashtari, Wato Ashiel. Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Schneider-Ashtari. I'm a member of the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians and the Tribal Affairs Secretary here in California. Before we get started, we wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the unceded homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley, and Plains Miwok, the Nisenan people, the Patwin Wintoon people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we're joining from in our virtual community, we're all on California Native land. Yahui.
Thank you, Secretary. All right, I will move us on to the roll call. So this is the attendance roll call for the council. We need a majority of members or a quorum to officially meet and hold this meeting. As a reminder, only council members in person count towards quorum. Council members, after I call your name, please say present or here. Apologies if I mispronounce any names. And designees, please state your name using a microphone for the record when your council member is called. All right, Tamika Moss, Kim Johnson, Michelle Boss, Stephanie Clendenin, Christina Curry, thank you, Susan Damaris, Dina Eltawansi, thank you, Margot Cushell.
I'm joining virtually.
Thank you. Veronica Lewis.
Present.
Jeff McCumber. Erica Pan.
Stephanie Weldon, designee.
Thank you. Kaina Pereira. Kim Rutledge. Present. Tony Sturch.
Present.
Lindsay Sin.
Roberto Herrera, designee.
Thank you. Christina Schneider-Ashtari.
Present.
Rowena Tomanang.
Stacy Shears, designee.
Thank you. Jennifer Troya. Gustavo Velasquez.
Present.
And Marina Wyant.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. I will move us on to the next agenda item. All right. This is agenda item 2, the consent calendar. The consent calendar is for regular or non-controversial items that need to be approved by the council via vote. While we do not expect discussion from members, the council may engage in discussion on any items of the consent calendar if they so choose. We have two items, the adoption of the December 3rd council meeting summary and the September 3rd council meeting summary. The September meeting summary is here as well, as it did not get enough votes at the last meeting. So are there any comments from council members? All right, seeing no comments, we will move on to a vote. Since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open it up to members, open up for public comment. Please keep comments to items on the consent calendar only. If your comments are not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for public comment at the end of this meeting. If you're connected through Zoom, select the raise hand icon. For those joining us by phone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment, and you'll be instructed to unmute yourself. And you'll have 2 minutes to make your comment. If you're joining us in person, please raise your hand if you have a comment on the consent calendar. All right, I see no hands raised online either. All right. So we will move on to vote. Before that, let me call the meeting to order. So this meeting is called to order at 1:09 p.m. And then seeing no comments, would anybody like to motion to approve the meeting summary? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. We have a motion and a second to adopt, so we will now take a vote. As a reminder, only in-person council members may vote. If you are a designee, please refrain from voting. And we will be voting through raised hands. The categories will be as follows: yes, no, and abstaining. For those voting yes, please raise your hand. I see 14 hands raised. For those voting no, please raise your hands. And for those abstaining, please raise your hand. Thank you, council members. The motion passes. The meeting summaries are approved. I will now pass it to our co-chairs for their opening remarks. So we can start with Secretary Moss.
All right. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Good afternoon to those behind me. I'm sorry I have my back to you. I first just wanted to thank Secretary Sin for hosting us in the bomb shelter. It's very exciting. I'm sorry she's not with us today, but thank you so much for your hospitality. We appreciate it. Also wanted to just acknowledge we have some colleagues in the audience from our SAFE Task Force. So thank you all so much for your partnership, members and council members around this table. Thank you all as well for all the work that we've been doing together on that front. It does feel a little bit like the time of partnerships. I've been spending so much time with Secretary Johnson lately in the spirit of some of the collaborative work that we've all been doing together. Secretary McCumber hosted us at Folsom State Prison, where we got to see some of the great work that CDCR is doing. So just grateful to all of you for your continued incredible partnership. Secretary Schneider-Ashtari, we got to visit the Palo community in our outreach that we've been doing for the reorganization in the last couple of weeks. So just appreciate you all for all the work you've been doing. I wanted to maybe just start with some of the federal landscape. I know many of us are tracking all of the goings on, but just wanting to, mention our ongoing litigation around the HUD COC NOFO, that we continue to be in partnership with our communities across the country who are working on that, as well as the mixed status rule that was just released a few weeks ago that would jeopardize stable housing for thousands of families across the state and across the nation. So, we are in multi-state lawsuits, as many of you all know from your departments and agencies, in our efforts to continue to support and safeguard the rights of Californians and those at risk of experiencing homelessness. So just thought it was important to start there because the anecdote to that is what we are doing at the state level and what the governor is asking of all of us to make sure that Californians are supported through our work, which leads me to my most exciting announcement this week. We had a press conference lifting up some of the work that Director Velasquez has been doing at HCD with our HAP Round 6 applications that were announced this week. We had more than 20 regions awarded their funding this week, all across the state, just doing amazing work. We could not do what we do within our departments and agencies without our local partners. And I just am so grateful to the work that our cities and counties and community-based organizations are doing. In service of those goals, we have more than 330,000 people who have been supported and access services through our HAP program. Can we pause on that? I mean, I'm saying a lot of people. And more than 90,000 folks have been housed through our work. ICH started that program. It now lives at our sister agency at HCD. So just wanting to acknowledge you, Director Velasquez, Megan, all of the work that our teams are doing to make sure that our communities have the resources that they need to best serve our communities. Very, very important points of pride. We also know that data because of our HDIS work. And I just want to acknowledge Sydney and the work that our data team at ICH has been doing. They recently presented at the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, where communities all over the country are asking us, how are we collecting our data and creating metrics for communities to actually reduce homelessness in their communities? So just really grateful and excited about that work that's been going on. We also announced our Home Key Plus program, which is our partnership through Prop 1. And we had 45 Home Key Plus awards, 8 this last round, but 45 Home Key Plus awards, totaling 2,260 affordable homes, 545 of those for our veterans. So really grateful for that. So in spite of all that is really difficult in our world right now, we have really amazing things that are happening in our state within our departments and agencies that I just wanted to make sure you council members knew about and that the public was aware of. The last thing I wanted to highlight was the reorganization. I have mentioned that my agency, BCSH, is being reorganized through the governor's reorganization plan. That became law in July of 2025. We are slated to, per statute, as of July 1st, we will become the California Housing and Homelessness Agency, as well as our Business Consumer Services Agency. So that we will split in two. We will be operational. Our teams have been really hard at work getting that reorganization together. I want to thank many of you all across the table, again, in the spirit of partnership. The HDFC committee, which will be the committee that will align our housing and homelessness programs into a singular application, really streamlining a lot of the work that's been done over the many years to make it easier and faster and cheaper to build deeply affordable housing and bring our neighbors indoors as quickly as we can. So lots going on, y'all. I just wanted to share a couple of those things and really talk also about the work that our Civil Rights Department is doing. Our Civil Rights Department will be a part of the new Housing and Homelessness Agency. And in this moment especially, it feels really central to the work that we're doing to make sure that every Californian's rights are safeguarded and that we are providing the kind of support that everyone needs in this moment. So I'll leave it there, pass it to Secretary Johnson, but thank you all so much for all that you all are doing on behalf of California.
Thank you, Secretary Moss, and also want to echo and pile on appreciation to everyone in this room and beyond on all the work that's been happening. As you've seen the governor report, we have successfully reduced unsheltered homelessness by 9% across the state of California. And I just lift that up, much to do with what Secretary Moss just outlined, but also some of the work also happening across the Health and Human Services Agency that we're going to be able to dig a little deeper into today, led by the Healthcare Services Department. But I want to just make sure, as our strategic plan sets forth, that we are capturing what is working and making progress across the state and all the efforts that we're making together, recognizing we have an urgency about more to do, and especially those who have more complex needs and need us the most. And that was the other component of the announcement you heard from the governor this week, which is related to our CARE Act, supporting those with schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders to also get the services they need to be healed, recover, and successfully thrive. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But want to just again note that integration is the secret sauce. And we know that in terms of the outcomes that we're seeing. Some of the places that Secretary Moss and I have been together have been unveiling of some of the capital investments we've been making. We've actually seen things being built that have been invested in across the state. But the thing, in addition to that, that warms my heart are the people that we're meeting, the residents of these new permanent supportive housing sites and other sites and settings that we're meeting, who are talking about their journey and who are talking about also how hard, in some cases, the transition has been to be sheltered. That they haven't quite made it to the bed maybe yet. They still may be sleeping on the floor of their room based on their own life experience. And so just want to center that we are making a difference. And it also just, to me, is a reflection of, again, how much need there is and the urgency we need to meet the people and get them housed as soon as possible. So just want to lift that up for the council, that the people are appreciative and they are transitioning and they are healing. And I want to share that message along the way too. In that same spirit, appreciate Megan, who offered to the council to view Beyond the Bridge, a documentary that I know Dr. Cashel, Director DeMoris, Director Troy, and a few others participated in, just to give us, again, the same spirit of compelling reason. It was about how to create success. And I would venture to say that much of what we heard are the things that we have identified as our objectives and goals together, and that we are working and making progress on. So just want to appreciate the invitation to participate in that. But also on the same note that Secretary Moss referenced related to some of the housing implications of federal policy, clearly Health and Human Services has had a huge impact and will. We talked about HR 1 and its impact in mitigating the harm of that policy in California. 1/3 of all of the litigation that the Attorney General has brought forward in California has been Health and Human Services centered. So that just gives you a sense of how much the target is. It really is a target on the safety net more broadly. So just again, to continue to embed what is working and make sure we're lifting that up in real ways, not only, again, the individual impact that we can see in for ourselves, our communities, our neighbors, but also just the general public, because again, there are many narratives that are being cast out there about what does and doesn't work, and it's really critical that we lift up the successes that we're making together. So just want to invite that and also appreciate everyone's partnership along the way. With that, I will turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you, co-chairs. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Marshall. I'm the Executive Officer for the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. Thank you all for joining. And thank you, Calvet, again for hosting. For those of you who were with us in December, we were so excited to host at Melee and had more technical difficulties than should exist in a new state office. But between HHS building here and Calvet here, I think we might have found a new home. So very much appreciated. So before diving into updates, I just want to briefly ground us. We have a lot of new folks in the audience. We typically have, same demographic of folks joining Cal ACH's quarterly meetings, but just want to ground us in the role of the council, which exists to bring together many systems that intersect with homelessness, so that our work is coordinated, data informed, and aligned towards shared outcomes. But we know housing ends homelessness, but ensuring people can access and sustain housing requires coordination to act, across health, behavioral health, which is sort of the focus of the presentation later in the agenda. Certainly social services, transportation, emergency response, and housing systems. And that coordination is exactly what this council represents around this table. So I want to share a few updates on the work underway across these collective systems. So as Secretary Moss noted, myself and Sydney Bennett, who's our Director of Data and Research, testified before the legislature around homelessness data, specifically Homeless Data Integration System, or HDIS, which continues to serve as our mission critical statewide platform for understanding homelessness across the state. It allows for us to integrate data from 44 continuums of care and begin connecting outcomes across our state investments as well as our federal investments. It is the only system of its kind in the country. And so we are incredibly proud of that. We're working very closely with Cal HHS on a data sharing agreement that will link data from DHCS, from CDSS to help us understand the overlap. Certainly, we know exists, but can now prove with our data. And thank you. Yes, this is why multitasking is not a strong suit of Megan Marshall, but there we are. Now we're on executive officer updates on the agenda. So the conversation at the hearing also touched on the state auditor's high risk report, which included a number of homelessness related programs and investments. Really important to highlight that Senator Cabaldon acknowledged during the hearing that AB 799 should not have been included as a program sort of to watch in that report. As 799 is something that we are actively integrating. In fact, we have a demo for the council today, and we'll certainly be meeting the implementation timeline of June 2027, if not in advance of. So that was I think a public comment that speaks to the tremendous work that Sydney and her team are producing, as well as the collective response of our council. So on the note of AB 799 implementation, I want to provide an update to you all in a brief demo. Our team has been working closely with council member departments to begin analyzing fiscal data elements that you all are collecting, who are administering programs. Those programs are what we call the AB 977 programs. Unfortunate likeness between the two pieces of legislation, but they really do complement one another. But this work is helping us better understand the scale, structure, and categories of homeless investments across the state. So today we'll be soft launching a new tool developed as part of our implementation of 799. It had previously been known as the Strategic Funding Guide, and was a static document that was updated on an annual basis. Not a whole lot of uses for, other than if you were a researcher, somebody who wanted to do reporting on, but wasn't something that our stakeholders, our collective stakeholders, found to be incredibly useful. So the tool that you all see today brings us into to modern technology. And with a renaming, it's the Statewide Homelessness Funding Navigator. So it's an interactive tool that helps the general public, Californians at large, better understand and strategically use the state and some federal investments administered by our council member departments. Users can filter by eligible applicants, eligible uses, and populations served. And the goal is to help communities align investments, identify gaps, and strengthen their overall response to homelessness. The Navigator really highlights major homelessness-related investments overseen specifically by our council member departments. It's not an exhaustive list, and some programs, of course, have additional eligibility requirements, particularly those that are tied to safety net programs. So this is meant to be something that sort of gives you an overview of the state's investments. You have to certainly visit the administrating department's website to apply and to get additional information. But with that, we'll just do a real quick demo. Thank you, Giselle. All right, so this will exist on our main website. We'll have a what's new announcement. We'll be sending out some toolkit media release information to our council member departments, but with a particular emphasis on departments who have programs that are included in this tool. But you can see here, you can filter by if you were interested in a specific department represented on our council. If you were a specific applicant who wanted to apply for a program, if you had specific eligible uses, and you can select more than one, and then target population. And so I just want to highlight. You see the list for target populations here is quite extensive, as are the eligible uses, as are eligible applicants. All of that to say, we spend a lot of time talking about HAP, ERF, which are certainly amazing investments in the ecosystem of addressing homelessness, but they're two of many. And what is possible when these programs and initiatives are used together, complementing each other, is pretty amazing work. So just wanted to showcase this to you all today. There is, let's see here, let me just shimmy these. I guess I can minimize. All right, there we go. So there are links that will take you to the administrating department's website, but you can view more to have a lengthier explanation with additional details that just were not because of literal space on the screen could not fit. But I just want to acknowledge the amount of time and coordination that it took to get this particular tool up and running. Our investments are significant. All of the staffing that are assigned to support these resources are significant. Our legislative priorities and language and nomenclature, all of those things are significant. So this is what you see here is a culmination of, in the last 10 weeks, certainly has been the focus of the statewide policy team, but working very closely with the staff of each of the administrating departments. So with that, I just want to say first, thank you to the council member departments, to your staff for coordinating, as well as to our statewide policy team for sort of bringing this to fruition and making it something that is usable and something that's helpful for communities who want to understand what money exists and how it can be used. Thank you again, Giselle. I need to be very mindful that this is a platform when I walk off of it because I am a little clumsy. So with that, I just want to also take a moment to acknowledge the impact of the documentary Beyond the Bridge, as Secretary Johnson mentioned. Many of our partners had the opportunity to see that in Sacramento. The film highlights both the scale of homelessness nationally and the types of system level solutions that are required to address it, with a particular highlight of housing first. So several council member departments played an important role in supporting the showing, and just want to extend appreciation to first and foremost, Dr. Margot Cushel, who participated not just on the panel, which was in the evening, but also on a legislative hearing panel, which was in the morning. And so in addition to her role at UCSF, spent like the entirety of her day with us in Sacramento, and we're just very happy to have had that time with her. But as Secretary mentioned, we had representation from Cal HHS, DHCS, CDA, CDSS, and of course HCD. However, I want to offer special acknowledgement to folks who joined from the Office of Emergency Services and Caltrans, who continue to be extraordinary partners to Cal ICH as we continue to partner on the Governor's Safe Task Force, which is the state action facilitation for encampments, addressing encampments in our most populous cities on state right-of-way. And so, we acknowledge the participation and the passion that came from HHS department, certainly our sister department of HCD, but are very excited for the familiarity and the fluency that's existing and continues to cultivate between OES and Caltrans, which folks sometimes don't immediately think of when it comes to addressing homelessness in California. So your collaboration really demonstrates exactly the kind of cross-system coordination that this council was intended to do. So thank you all. Speaking of that work, and I'm near the end of my comments here before I get a time warning from our staff. Safe Task Force continues to operate in partnership with Caltrans and OES. And in addition to the ongoing coordination efforts, the task force is really beginning to shift some focus towards planning major upcoming events, including the World Cup and the Olympic Games. So these events will bring global attention to California, as we all know, as did the Super Bowl, and will continue to provide an opportunity to accelerate and to spotlight, highlight the work aimed at reducing unsheltered homelessness in those communities, but using state resources and support to do so. So last but certainly not least, I want to highlight that recruitment is currently open for two very important advisory bodies for Cal ICH. These are not public bodies. These bodies are meant to advise myself and my team, and we have incorporated them into our standard agendas. But these two bodies are the Lived Experience Advisory Board, or the LEAB, and the Tribal Advisory Board. And I don't know that we're committing to calling it TAB. I don't know how I feel about that just yet, but the Tribal Advisory Board. So both will play a critical role in ensuring our work is informed by the perspectives of people with lived experience, and certainly those within tribal government. And applications are currently available on our website. You all have received some information in your packets. But we reach out to certain council member departments who have those deeper connections within those populations to ensure that we're spreading the news of these opportunities to your networks. So again, just want to close out with thank you all for the continued partnership. This is incredibly challenging work, but we're all very fortunate to bring our collective skill sets and expertise to address it. So with that, I will turn it over and move us along the slides. Look at that, me doing that without being prompted. Nope. All right, there we go. Yes, moving on to advisory committee updates. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex and Roxanne.
Thank you so much, Megan. I will go first. I should start by saying that I have a tremendous amount of respect for each and every one of you. I recognize that we are in the middle of reforming multiple systems of housing and care, and I acknowledge that it is not easy. Thank you all for showing up every single day. I think we all agree that accountability is non-negotiable. Local governments must be accountable to the communities we serve, to the state that entrusts us with resources, and to the individuals experiencing homelessness who rely on our systems to work. But accountability must begin with accuracy and acknowledgement that context matters. When the state makes claims about performance, the numbers must be correct. I will use my community as an example. The state's accountability dashboard states that Californians deserve results from their local governments, and we agree. But those results must be measured accurately. The dashboard currently reports that Monterey County has experienced a 46.4% increase in unsheltered homelessness. That statistic is incorrect, as is the number of housing units produced in this community when compared to the state's open data portal. Monterey County is part of a 2-county continuum of care, and the state's dashboard combines our data with that of our neighboring county, something we have raised previously. When looking at Monterey County's actual data, our unsheltered population did in fact increase by 27.93%, but it is not 46. Even that number requires context. Our overall homeless count increased by 19%. A statistic that is not represented at all on the dashboard. And what the dashboard also fails to show is that between 2017 and 2022, our county reduced overall homelessness by 28%. When numbers are presented without accuracy or context, the consequences are real. These statistics shape public perception. They influence trust in government, and they create a narrative within our communities that resources are being mismanaged. when in fact, local governments are working harder than ever to respond to an increasingly complex crisis. There is another reality we must acknowledge. Over the past decade, the homeless services sector has repeatedly stepped in to fill gaps left by other systems. When we could not get our people into housing, we built housing ourselves. When behavioral health systems could not meet the demand, we hired our own clinicians. When individuals cannot access rehabilitation services, we created our own recuperative care programs. Local homeless systems have been forced to become housing developers, healthcare providers, and treatment coordinators all at once. Yet, despite carrying these responsibilities, the homelessness sector remains severely under and inconsistently funded. One-time funding will not get us out of this mess. As a matter of fact, it exacerbates it. Local homelessness systems are now facing the threat of losing funding due to factors outside of our control, such as a non-compliant housing element, limited care court referrals, and system capacity issues in behavioral health in the courts. We are also expected to implement encampment policies that align with the state's guidance and the 7 principles for addressing encampments, principles that appropriately require outreach and service connections before encampment resolution occurs. Yet the funding streams designed to support these efforts are often making it extremely difficult to invest meaningfully into street outreach. HAP is a perfect example. Bad policies produce bad outcomes. What we are asking for is simple: partnership. Real partnership means accurate data, realistic expectations, and policies designed with an understanding of how local governments operate on the ground. We share the same goal: ensuring that every dollar invested produces meaningful results for Californians experiencing homelessness. And we look forward to working with the state and addressing homelessness together, not in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne, for kicking us off. And thank you, members of the council. Thank you, co-chairs Moss, Johnson, for the time today. I'm coming to you live from the NEH conference here in San Diego. And I've had the pleasure of spending time with Cal ICH staff down here, as well as HCD staff and many incredible providers and COC leaders from across California. We also had Deputy Secretary Wickrama down here to give a great presentation the other day. And I've also seen several of my former and current fellow advisory committee members. There's a sense of togetherness and a sense of unity of purpose here among the folks that are here, including from our friends at the state, even as we face unprecedented risks from the federal government. And I think it's worth remembering that, on the federal side, a month ago, we got some helpful language from Congress in the appropriations deal, but that has by no means resolved the threats we face. And so in that spirit of togetherness, of collaboration, I wanted to follow up co-chair Wilson's comments with a little more of the kind of gentle calling in that I think we are able to do when we have shared values and shared purpose, as all of us do. We've seen some helpful changes from HCD and HAP to help our local grantees like Monterey County meet the moment. Simplifying the process to amend HAP spending plans has been much appreciated. But there's many, many, many more things we can and we must do, both to help our locals meet the moment by giving them the resources and flexibility they need to keep people in housing. And also, as we look at these accountability provisions, as we look at the data, to recognize the context that Roxanne mentioned, recognize the increased pressures and constraints that are going to be faced. We're already seeing impacts rolling in. Got report of seniors in a PSH building getting eviction notices. Got a report of an operator walking away from a PSH site because they can't take on the risk and uncertainty of operating in this space anymore. And while the litigation that California is engaged in and that my organization is engaged in has secured this preliminary injunction to keep this damaging COC NOVA from moving forward, funding is frozen right now. And we haven't seen any movement from HUD to comply with congressional instructions to get money out the door to renew expiring grants. That's what local jurisdictions are facing, what local operators and providers are facing, and of course, what people experiencing homelessness are facing. So I think when you hear some frustration coming from local jurisdictions at this moment, it's recognizing that what folks are looking for is partnership, is collaboration, and that's a two-way street, right? The other piece I want to remark on is sustaining the progress. Secretary Moss pointed to the hundreds of thousands of people that have been served through HAP and pointed to the over 90,000 people that have been placed into permanent housing thanks to HAP. And it's great to hear the state speak proudly, as it should, about that progress from recent years. The decline in unsheltered homelessness that we saw in this year's data, the flattening of the curve while the rest of the country has seen homelessness skyrocketing. And yet, I think, since we last came together as a council, we've seen a January budget proposal from the administration that takes the foot off the gas and doesn't propose to continue HAP at the level needed to sustain that progress and continue to drive down homelessness. We've made many incredible gains in the last few years, thanks to the leadership of many people on this body. And we urge you to continue doing the things that will sustain that progress for years to come and leave a lasting legacy of really having taken on this issue head on. And so those were central focal points of our advisory committee discussion last month in February. We also got a really helpful presentation from Deputy Secretary Wickrama on the new housing agency and that going live in the coming months, which was exciting to hear. Also a great presentation from Glenn Sang at DHCS about the status of the Medi-Cal interventions. So appreciate DHCS for bringing that information as well. And the advisory committee looks forward to continuing to work with you all and raise the issues that we're seeing across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, advisory committee co-chairs. We appreciate your partnership. Certainly look forward to continuing as we reimagine the advisory committee as a body and lifting those critical issues up to the council. So thank you. And with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is Lived Experience Advisory Board updates. We will hear from two new members, two newly appointed supports is what this body refers to them as, but they do operate similarly to the way that the co-chair model operates for the advisory committee and for the council. So with that, I will ask Alex and Mary to take a moment to introduce themselves and to provide the council with an updates from the lead.
Okay, hi. So first, I just want to apologize for not having a camera. I'm at an eye appointment, but I'm still here either way. So hello, my name's Mary, and I am a member of the Cal ICH. I'm currently experiencing homelessness. Where my perspective on my own journey has given me a raw view of what it's like to hit rock bottom in a place where the struggle is for survival is consistent, but the struggle to get clean while homelessness is profoundly difficult, presenting constant tests and the lack of basic necessities to make it making stability a distant dream. It underscores the urgent need for supportive environments, lack of sober living facilities. Our community goes from emergency shelters for a few weeks to providing permanent housing, missing the bridge for sober living. We don't have the lack of people who want to be sober. We have the lack of beds to allow them to do so. Reasons like zoning wall or funding may be why we don't have them, but bottom line, stability serves as the bedrock to practically every positive aspect of our lives. Think of it as like the foundation of a house. Without a strong one, the walls can't be built on a structure that can't withstand the storm, which is why I advocate for more sober living facilities. I'd also like to discuss the need to stop. Okay, Alex, if you want to take on from here.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary. So my name is Alex Sanchez. I am the other lead support for Cal ICH's Lived Experience Advisory Board. I myself have formerly experienced homelessness. And in regards to Mary's point, that is an ongoing topic that has been brought up across all parts of of California, the need for sober living facilities. And we are wondering, like, how can we drive funding toward building or expanding sober living facilities or SUD resources throughout the state? Um, Throughout the state, it is very sparse for, low
Hmm.
or no cost, but also throughout the Central Valley as well, especially. Most of the sober living facilities are multiple miles away from folks, and people have no access to get there, or they don't have, if there's one near there, and they don't have the appropriate means of cash flow or appropriate insurance to be able to cover those things. Um, and those are just some things that I wanted to add on Mary's topic. And then also just a lot of folks don't understand the lack of resources for that as well. People just think it's just like, hey, you sign up, you walk in, you're all good. Like that's not actually how it works, right? There are limited beds. Like I said, they're miles away. There's no transportation. There's no connection to there. So we would like to see the state be able to, in some way or some capacity, discuss ways in which funding can be used to incentivize areas to build those sober livings, so that people experiencing homelessness can sustain their housing. Um, another topic that was brought up and heavily discussed was the point in time count. A lot of
Yeah.
folks on the Cal ICH Lived Experience Advisory Board, either as advocates or part of their job descriptions or community members, are part of the point in time count planning and the actual surveying the day of. And so what they're reporting is an increase of law enforcement sweeps during the designated time of point in time count, uh, as designated by HUD, the last 10 days of January. And so we all understand, like, those are things that HUD requires that it be within that time period. But we as the league are wondering, what can the state and the departments do to deter county and law enforcement sweeps uh, during that time period so that we can produce accurate pig counts and overall help ensure that this pig count is not only just accurate in the number of people experiencing homelessness, but also accurate in the experiences that they're having, the services that they're accessing, so that we can use evidence-based practices and evidence-based strategies to address homelessness. Because at the end of the day, sweeping is only moving people around and not necessarily is there in every area or throughout the state beds for folks to go to in that exact moment. It's great if there are beds that folks can go to when encampment resolution happens, but if there are no beds that folks can go to, whether shelter, emergency services, or permanent housing, all we're doing is pushing folks around and not understanding the full detail of what it is that folks need so that we can accurately house and address the issues that prevent folks from being homeless and sustain themselves. And then I'll let Mary go back to the next thing that we were gonna talk about.
Yes, Alex. Okay. So displacements, yeah, that's brutal because then you have everybody moving around when they do have the raid, and then you can't get an actual count, and that also makes it bad for the community because then if you don't get the right count, you don't get the right help for for your community. So yeah. But yeah, so what we'd like to discuss next would be the harmful and false narratives about homelessness. How can we create a culture and system where all decisions at local and state level are evidence-based and not myth-based or based on unfounded assumptions? So the idea that homelessness is a lifestyle choice or it's us just being lazy isn't just a myth. Isn't I'm sorry.
Take your time, Mary.
Okay. Okay. Myth is a Okay, it's not a myth. It's a shield I believe that people use to avoid looking at how broken their system is. Most of us have most of them have jobs. And but primarily being homeless is in itself being a full-time job of survival that pays nothing. Um Also, there's another myth of the liking it, or while there may be a tiny fraction of people who have lived outside so long that they have disconnected from the traditional society, this isn't a preference. It's often a trauma response. For myself and the lead members, the goal is clear: stability. Somewhere you can go to somewhere, a place where you can lock your door, a place where some people call home, some people may call rehab, but all together, I call it foundation, a place where you can start, where life starts, where your foot is on the right, your shoes on the right foot. If your head is wet, if you're trying to fix your head but your feet are wet, you're not going to get far. Um, that's how. What were my thoughts? What do you think about it, Alex?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mary. Like, having experienced homelessness myself multiple times. Um, I was a young college student the first time that I experienced homelessness straight out of high school. And there are a lot of myths that go around about the narratives that we spin about homelessness, why folks are homeless, why don't they just go get resources, how the resources are actually attained and accessible, the number of resources there actually are. There's a lot of myths going around, and I 100% agree with Mary about using these myths as shields rather than addressing the actual root causes based on evidence. So that just ties into like what we were talking about, the point in time count. This is why we need a way to strategize to incentivize these states and other regions. We understand at the end of the day, regions and jurisdictions and cities and counties and law enforcement will do as they decide amongst themselves. But for the state to be able to either incentivize or support these areas in a way that can address the facts. If we are if we really are having folks, and I'll bring up another myth aside from folks experiencing homelessness because they choose to, or folks experiencing homelessness because they want to be on drugs. Another common thing in California, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard it, is that everyone who's homeless in California is not a California native and was shipped here from other states. That is an ongoing hurtful and harmful thing. I do know some folks who came from out of state because they were experiencing homelessness in other states and just came here because they knew people here and it would have support here, but it didn't turn out. I'm sure there are folks who do have those experiences, but the overwhelming majority of folks who are experiencing homelessness here in the state are California natives or folks who were living here prior to their episode of homelessness. And so that's why we really just want to be able to work with Cal ICH and the state on being able to create a culture and a narrative that is rooted in facts, and rooted in attempting to end homelessness and attempting to address the things that cause it or cause relapses of housing. Because the one thing is like getting people into housing, but then if they can't sustain that themselves, then we're going to just have repeated episodes of homelessness because of the way that infrastructure for programs or funding or policies are being written and put into place. And so I know we just talked a lot of things and asked a lot of questions, but I do just want to pause because I'm not really sure with the Zoom being shared like that. I can't really see how much time there is left. So I do want to pause in case we are going over time.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mary. We actually have 2 minutes, but we started late, so we can certainly spend a few more on this item. But I just want to, for the good of the council, just to share, many of the things that Alex and Mary identified as being myths or hurtful rhetoric was touched on in the Beyond the Bridge film. And I did just want to give a second for Dr. Kushel, who's joining us virtually. I had said in your briefing, Dr. Kushel, if you remember, I said I was going to ask you to share your thoughts on the panel and certainly on the documentary. But curious if you can draw those easy connections between what we've heard from our LEAB members here today and what was shown and discussed in the film.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you to the lead members for a fantastic and really meaningful presentation. I think we see those myths everywhere. One of the interesting things about Beyond the Bridge is that they traveled all over the country. In every place, other people who experience homelessness, people say that they're coming from some other place. And in some ways, people are really looking for an excuse to not act and not do what we all know we need to do. And those myths persist, those myths about homelessness and behavioral health conditions being interchangeable, sort of the same thing, the myths that people are the myths that people don't want to be housed. And in some ways, this has almost become a narrative question rather than anything else. There's no question that those things are divisive and completely untrue, but we are living in a world where facts don't really lead. And I think in some ways we need to, both as leaders, be sure that we're not unintentionally perpetuating those myths, but also try to figure out a better way to let the sort of truth come out. And I think hearing from lead members and putting them out front and to talk about their experiences is very important as well. So appreciate the lead presentation and really think that we just need to make sure in a world where there's so much harm that none of us are unintentionally adding to that harm, and that we're sure to understand the real root causes of homelessness, but also to keep our eyes on the prize that we do know how to solve this, and we just need to keep executing as best we can.
Thank you, Dr. Kushel, and thank you, Alex and Mary, for your testimony and your updates on behalf of the LEAB. One other note about sort of the state. We talk often about the state. It's this massive thing, geographically speaking, but also in terms of our state departments. Not every department is represented on this council, but the ones who are the ones who most intersect with this type of work. I will say from sort of coordinating and supporting the work of the SAFE Task Force, one of the sort of unfortunate uncoverings for me was staff at either Caltrans or OES didn't necessarily know who Cal ICH was, didn't necessarily know that their department director was represented on the council. And so those are opportunities for myself, for my staff to do deeper engagements, not just with OES and with Caltrans, but with each of you represented. And I think some of those opportunities is what lends itself to those culture shifts, culture changes, an opportunity to help staff who are certainly Californians understand where the state's investments are and what is happening that isn't always necessarily making a headline. So that is my commitment in fiscal year 26-27. So thank you again, Dr. Kushel. Thank you again, Mary and Alex. I will just take a pause here. The council has heard from 3 groups of updates. If there are any questions or comments before we advance onto the next item, which is our council member department updates. But I'll take a pause here. Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary and Alex, for sharing your story. And Mary, every time you show up here, even though you're still actively trying to become stably housed, I think it's really meaningful. We need to recognize she is still on her journey. Our system has still not been able to house her yet, and she's still showing up in the leave space and showing up to this space to share her story. And so I'm hoping that that changes soon, but I appreciate both Mary and Alex for being here. Just a couple of things that come to mind. I just want to add a few things to what they said, just in terms of like, what does that mean for the folks that are here? Obviously, you know, the harm because of the myths that doesn't only come in the form of NIMBYism with all of the housing projects that are trying to be built, whether they're permanent or interim housing, but there's actual violence, right, and vitriol for people that are living outdoors because they have nowhere else to go, and people are mistreating them, the invisibility, right, and even just the engagement of some of the local jurisdictions that are accessing state dollars, as well as the service providers just having to deal with a whole lot of stuff because of the misnomers. I also think, though, that to the point of what can the state do in relation to that, I think that many of you know that 10, 12 years ago, the conversation around most tables for people that were not a part of the sector about mental health was what? It was negative. There was a lot of stigma tied to mental health. There's been a lot of work done, and anybody know what I'm talking about? Like the intentional anti-stigma mental health campaign has now shifted how people talk about mental health. Are any of you aware of that? If you're not, it's okay. But are you aware of that? Okay, so I think that when we think about what is it going to take to really shift the narrative, I think that that's one model to possibly look like. There was very intentional investment and alignment across an array of multi-jurisdictional agencies and departments, multiple departments across jurisdictions, both local and statewide, and we even had a federal campaign. And I think, you know, we keep saying it, we keep talking about it, but I hope that at some point, and I know we got a lot of work to do, we're in a very difficult environment politically, funding contraction wise, but I hope that at some point in the next couple of years, like we can get to that point of really saying, how can we be intentional, even as you all are doing your press conferences, right? And I know that the state has really shifted in the last several years to use person-centered language, but it's more to it than just person-centered language. When we talk about trying to reshape how people think about people that are in housing crisis, I think there's a lot more work that can be done at the State Department level with any of your publications, with any of your media events. And so hopefully we can come to that. The other thing I just wanted to say, I'm trying to look at my notes, sorry. With respect to, sorry, I'm trying to pull my notes up, y'all. The other thing I want to say, just in terms of like how the state agencies are responding to the uncertainty that's being created by the federal policy shifts, or even things that are still kind of pending because of the lawsuits or other activities. I think, you know, thank you to HCD for some of the flexibility you're building in. And I think that if there's even more opportunity, right, for you all to be more flexible and remove some of the administrative burdens that are tied to HAP. HAP is amazing. I personally have administered dollars across multiple program components from HAP, so I know how beneficial it is. And I think that if there's any opportunity to continue to look at ways to lessen the burden on the jurisdictions, not only in terms of the administrative burden, but also in terms of really, you know, not necessarily having to ask for different exceptions, but creating an opportunity that makes it really simple. I would encourage you to do even more if possible. But thank you for being responsive to the moment. And I encourage HCD and all the rest of your departments who are interacting with jurisdictions and service providers that are in this state of unknown to be mindful, and anything that's not regulatory or statutory that you can make adjustments to better support the jurisdictions and the providers. I encourage you to do that now, because it's a very difficult time for service providers. There's a lot of anxiety. People are really trying to plan, but you can't plan when you don't know what's going to happen. And obviously it's not just about the size and scope of the providers, but it's the employees, right? The people that are doing the work, many of which are coming from the same communities they serve, and obviously the communities at large that are going to be impacted as the capacity and the bandwidth of the work in the sector shrink. So anything you can do to remove administrative burdens at the State Department in response to these unprecedented times, I hope that you all will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. I just want to take a moment to congratulate and acknowledge Councilmember Lewis's recent award, Housing Justice Award 2026, and just how incredibly fortunate, yes, all the snaps, all the claps. For those of you who are not familiar, Councilmember Lewis comes to these, I would say she has near perfect attendance, just had one excused absence this last time, but she flies here from LA to actively participate in these conversations, and just how fortunate we are to have you. So thank you so much, and congratulations on that very well-deserved award. We are also so fortunate that we have the Housing Justice Award recipient from 2025 on our advisory committee, Director Roxanne Wilson. So I'm very confident that we have the right folks represented in this room, on our advisory committee, on our LEAB, to drive this work forward. So congratulations and thank you again. Secretary Moss?
I just wanted to appreciate our LEAB members as well as Roxanne, you and Alex. We don't just want to hear your feedback. We are taking what you're saying to heart, and so we will certainly do some follow-up with you, Roxanne, on what you've shared with us. And just to say, it is critically important that we continue to hear directly from people who are experiencing this crisis, what they are actually experiencing despite our best intent. We are not playing, and neither are they. And so I just feel like it's important to acknowledge the reality that every human in this ecosystem is having to contend with as we try to do our shared work together.
Thank you, Secretary Moss. And that has been a benefit of Safe Task Force. It's easy for us to read a plan, read a policy, read an ordinance, and make a judgment based on a piece of paper that's submitted from hundreds of miles away. But the opportunity of SAFE is for a small coalition of state leaders to really, literally and figuratively immerse ourselves in the goings-ons of these big cities. And while those are big cities, some of the counties where those big cities exist, Central Valley is well represented there. And so it's an opportunity for us to see how are you putting the policy that you've submitted into practice, and how is that serving or not serving your community. So thank you, Secretary. Any final thoughts from the council before we move on to the next portion of our agenda? Great. Hearing none, I will just take a moment again to say thank you to our advisory committee co-chairs. Thank you to our LEAP supports. We're very fortunate to have your expertise and your time. Thank you. So with that, we will move on to the next item on our agenda. It is agendized as the council member department updates. However, for the next hour and 15-ish minutes, we will be hearing from DHCS, CalHHS, and from RAND, who will be presenting on behalf of CalVet. Having come from good Lord, nearly 20 years of county experience across the continuum of health and human services, I cannot say how proud I am and how excited I am to see the changes that we've made in the space of behavioral health specifically, and sort of the renewed sense of hope and the innovation. This council member, our council meeting in December focused heavily on negative federal impacts and sort of what are we all bringing to the table to mitigate those impacts. This meeting is meant to highlight and acknowledge and sort of celebrate in this time that we have together to say we're still California, and there's still a tremendous amount that's possible in the work that the work and the policies that we administer. So with that, Secretary Johnson, I'm going to pass it to you, but would you, I'm happy to give you the clicker so you don't have to come up here. Great.
Thank you, Megan. And again, also want to appreciate Mary and Alex and the advisory committee, Roxanne and others for their remarks that we are working to put into action. And I think to Councilmember Lewis's point, we have made a change in terms of the narrative of how we talk about behavioral health and mental health services. And the reality is that I have never met a human being who hasn't needed help at some time or another. That's how we all got here. And certainly on the spectrum and the continuum of what that help looks like, we have been really focused on efforts to make sure anyone, anytime, any place across the state can get the support that they need. We're going to talk a bit about the Behavioral Health Services Act. And so to that point, the voters passed Proposition 1. The voters of California passed Proposition 1 in that same recognition of recognizing the need in where we're going. And so there are two components. One is the Behavioral Health Services Act, and the other, the Behavioral Health Bond. And that's a partnership not only with the Department of Healthcare Services, who's been leading a tremendous amount of this work with Director Boss's leadership, but also with CalVet and with BCSH with the Home Key Plus efforts. So again, partnerships continue to be our theme, but really addressing the needs and meeting people where they are is absolutely true. And would also note this is portions of ongoing funding streams. So to the point of one-time resources as well. So how and where am I pointing? Maybe that should go to the right direction. Where's the actual, that way? The computer. All right, so move. Have to hold it. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So on the same point of what success looks like in getting people access to the services they need, we are both focused on those who need help the most, as you heard me reference, in the care. And by the way, part of breaking down narratives and conversation is really getting to meet people. And when you meet with people and you talk with people and you hear their story and you hear about the individual who has bipolar disorder, who's also unsheltered, who also has advanced degrees, who also has a lot of other success in their life, right? You get to unpack that narrative and you start dispelling some of those myths and really understanding what ways we should as systems be able to respond to some of the work that we're doing. So a lot of work on those individuals with the most complex needs and how we are prioritizing them for where there are scarcity of resources into the supports that they need. The other area that we're focusing on is on prevention. So how can we get ahead of many of the challenges that we see, if not only for those resources being connected earlier, what efforts we're having. So that's all part of the strategy of reaching people where they are. The top part of the graphic that you see in front of you is related to the behavioral health continuum of care. A lot of what I just spoke to around the growing out that continuum and the capacity of the continuum to meet people's needs. We have, across the governor and legislature support in this administration, supported over $14 billion in behavioral health transformation and investments. And some of those building blocks of the transformation are here in front of you on that journey, both in terms of the populations that we focus on, but some of the pieces that we've had to bring in, Prop 1 being one of them that we'll spend some more time talking about today. But we're also taking approaches that recognize that health is also represented, and making sure people achieve their health outcomes is also represented by addressing the social determinants of health. And so while I clearly heard Roxanne in the advisory committee's remarks related to funding and the supports and needed there, there's a lot of policy and there's a lot of other ways, as Councilmember Lewis just also referenced, communications. There's a lot we can be doing and that we have to be thinking strategically about doing in addition to the investments that we're making across the continuum to strengthen along the way. One of those key opportunities, and I'll point you for this group right to the box, I think on your right-hand side, housing is health. quite a few different policy changes in this space in recognition, again, of the integration. It is actually, in fact, with housing, with health, inclusive of behavioral health, substance use disorder, and other components, the human services components. That's where we are seeing the success. That's where we're seeing sustained outcomes for people being sheltered in the work that we're doing. And of course, we not only, again, have to focus on some of the populations and specific efforts, but also in the people doing the work, the workforce, and ensuring that we have people who are meeting people, whether you call it trauma-informed, I like to say healing-informed approaches to the work to build relationship with people who have had broken trust in relationship time and time again, not only from maybe people that their loved ones, but also from those who have tried to help. And I think to Secretary Moss's point, it's not just being about well-intentioned, it's about understanding and engaging with individuals to meet the needs that they have and meet their own goals. So a lot of work in this space, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're measuring progress along the way. The next slide here. So while yes, the federal government has asked us in many different ways and different modalities to stop using the word equity, our job in health and human services is to address disparities and disproportionalities that exist. So that's our job. That is what we're here to do. And so we do have very focused populations in really trying to reduce disparities where we're seeing people overrepresented in various places, including homelessness. And we've heard Dr. Cashel bring some of that research to this council in the past. Also those that are criminal justice involved. And again, how are we supporting those while incarcerated? And you just heard we took a visit to Folsom State Prison recently and talked to people who were very interested in how the gubernatorial race was going to be, by the way. That was one of the comments that someone was like, who's going to be the next governor? But also how we are supporting people upon exit and reentry into community. How are they connected to their Medi-Cal and health benefits? How are they then connected to the medications that they're going to need to be stable and supported when they exit? Those kinds of things. And also that we are thinking about kind of least restrictive setting, community-based placements kind of throughout everything we do is part of care, again, where we are looking at. We're also seeing people self-petition for themselves that were in conservatorship to get a step down into care and support. So again, we're looking at that opportunity to make sure we're building community capacity in the least restrictive settings to support people, again, to meet their goals. Of course, also children and youth, and those especially in the child welfare system, which this council has also talked about as well, and having some focused efforts in the work. So here's the measurement. We want some things to go up and we want some things to go down. And I think the big thing I would say on this slide, this is how you'll see us measure our success throughout a lot of the behavioral health work that we're doing, is having this kind of collective impact. We are all working towards addressing what you see here on the screen, both in terms of access to care, the quality of life, how people are engaged in school and work, how they're connected socially, but also that we are seeing active reductions in suicide, active reductions in overdoses. Thank you to healthcare services for other interventions like having naloxone be more available in communities as an example. Again, we're trying to treat the behavioral health conditions earlier, and so really want to see a reduction in untreated conditions. Obviously, our collective work on addressing homelessness across the state and so forth. So these are our impact measures that you're going to see in ways to describe along the way how we're doing, the progress we're making. And so I think I'm going to quickly turn it over to Director Boss to say more. But again, from our perspective, it's very intentional strategies that we're addressing the gaps across the continuum that you see. That again, workforce and then settings themselves, you might hear references to beds and outpatient slots. We're talking about places for healing and recovery. And again, making sure, whether it's sober living, to Mary's comment, or other supports, that we have what's needed when it's needed. Again, addressing the settings and having that complement across communities, but that we also deliver. And that's, I think, you're hearing directly from the governor, you're hearing from all of us that it is our own experiences in our own communities where we recognize we still have more work to do every day when we walk out into community. And again, it's through the approaches that we're taking and the integration in that approach that we believe will make all the difference along the way. So Director Boss, I want to thank her and her team. One thing that you may hear the governor say frequently in Prop 1, the bond portion, the portion that is creating those additional settings and places to heal and recover, is the fastest deployment of getting those dollars out into community in the history of bonds in the state of California. So with that, I give to you, Director Boss, in this work.
So picking off where the secretary left off, let's move on. Today, we're going to cover just a little bit more about behavioral health transformation, including kind of some of the initiatives that the secretary mentioned, but most specifically the Behavioral Health Services Act, and then get into kind of a deeper dive with a component of the BHSA, the housing intervention bucket. And I will turn it over to Glenn for that. Okay. So behavioral health transformation is a pretty broad term. As one of the previous slides shows, we've been undertaking some really significant initiatives in the behavioral health space. And this includes CalAIM, which I know many of you are familiar with, which is really addressing the social drivers of health, how our housing deposits, housing tenancy services, how those types of services really support the health and well-being of individuals. Our BH Connect, which is another a waiver that we received from the federal government, really building on our community-based infrastructure and about almost $2 billion in workforce dollars to support the build out of behavioral health workforce. Similarly, we have our behavioral health infrastructure continuum program, which I will discuss, which is really building out that brick and mortar, our bridge housing dollars, which I know has been discussed at this council before as well, which is dollars for our county behavioral health departments to build out some behavioral health housing. And then the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, really getting at that upfront investment in our children and youth in the prevention space. But moving on to the key components of behavioral health services transformation and the BHSA. Prop 1 was passed 2 years ago. And so pretty excited as we launch really the kind of the new framework of how billions of dollars in local behavioral health funding goes to our counties. The BHSA expands services to include treatment for individuals with substance use disorder services only. Previously, it was a person had to have mental health or co-occurring. So this is really expanding the ability of those dollars to be used for individuals with substance use disorder needs. Identifies priority populations that the secretary just described, really focusing on those with the most high needs, high risk, complex individuals, and really directing these dollars towards serving those individuals. Updates the local categorical funding. So 30% of these dollars going at the local level going for housing interventions. And we'll get into the details on that. 35% for full service partnerships. This is really the whatever it takes model. And the BHSA provides a lot more standardization in terms of what the full service partnership means, so that we have a better understanding across the state how counties are delivering the services, how many people are impacted by these services, and really being able to tell that story. And then 35% for behavioral health services and support. And this is for broader purposes like early intervention and outreach. The Prop 1 also significantly increases accountability and transparency. We have, prior to the BHSA, the Mental Health Services Act required planning at the local level and really just governed the Mental Health Services Act dollars. Under Proposition 1 in the BHSA, that county integrated plan is really designed to look at all of the behavioral health dollars that a county receives. So this includes federal block grants, this includes realignment dollars, this includes BHSA, and how does the county plan for those dollars? And what is pretty exciting from the department's perspective as well is this planning process, we are integrating it with the local health jurisdiction. So our public health departments at the local local level, they do what is called a CHA and CHIP process. I'm not going to, those are acronyms, but I'm just going to call it the CHA and CHIP process, which is about public health dollars and public health planning. And then we have our Medi-Cal managed care plans, which have their population needs assessment process. So 3 different kind of local planning efforts that really are, if you think about a Venn diagram, have something that all 3 of them share together. And we're pulling these tables together so that there's integration across the systems at the local level. And so aligning these planning processes, the timing of these processes, the requirements for the individuals and the kind of the different system partners to come together to think about how to plan for these efforts. So we are pretty excited about this alignment. We're doing it at the state level and now doing it and really setting those tables at the local level as well. And then maybe moving on to the Infrastructure Bond Act. This is a pretty exciting opportunity to, build out $6.4 billion to build out the infrastructure for our communities. This includes behavioral health treatment and residential facilities, also includes permanent supportive housing with particular dollars for our veterans. And so very excited about that as well. We talked a little bit about this already. This is really just kind of a detailed update on kind of who these dollars are really kind of focused on. 90% of the kind of the millionaire's tax goes to our local communities and 10% is reserved for the state. And of that, talked a little bit about this already, the 30% for housing interventions, 35% for full service partnership, and 35% for behavioral health services and supports. Of the dollars at the state level, 3% is for the Department of Healthcare Access and Information with regards to workforce programs. 4% is for the California Department of Public Health for population-based prevention efforts. And then the remaining 3% is for other state departments, including the Department of Healthcare Services for just kind of the admin related to implementing BHSA. This diagram really kind of represents, as was discussed, those 14 population behavioral health goals, which we'll go into in a second, but really how we're thinking about it. We've defined these 14 goals, and how do we think about specific interventions to make improvements in these goals? These goals will roll out in phases. Phase 1 is really kind of statewide metrics in those 14 spaces. Those are published online. Phase 2 will be more county specific and more system specific. And so over time, as counties update their integrated plan annually, how do they drive their interventions to achieve better outcomes in these goals? And so we are continuously going to be monitoring this. We have our behavioral health outcomes and transparency report, which is kind of a 3-year report based on these outcomes and performance. And so just thinking about this as an iterative process and how our other system partners, again, public health and Medi-Cal managed care, how they contribute both their kind of their program perspective and their dollars for certain reinvestments. Here again are those 14 behavioral health goals. About a year ago, we convened a committee to really think about what are the goals that we all want to work towards. For the first time, we are really linking and pulling together data to actually demonstrate a person in Medi-Cal, how do they hit some of these different systems, and linking the data to show at the local level where they're at and where we want them to go. And so we will be holding our county plans, our managed care plans accountable to improving on these metrics as we think about how these dollars are used and what they say they're going to use these dollars for as part of the integrated plan. Now moving on to our BCHIP, we call it BCHIP, but our Behavioral Health Infrastructure, Continuum Infrastructure Program. In this program began in 2021, and it was authorized as part of the budget, just about $1.7 billion to start off this program. And we had about 5 rounds of funding for this purpose. And with the addition of the bond adding $3.3 billion to date, with rounds 3 through 5 of the kind of the original program and round 1 of the bond, we have funded 238 projects, an expansion of 413 behavioral health facilities, just about 6,900 new beds and about 42,000 new treatment slots. So a pretty significant investment thus far. We still have one more round of bond funding. Oh,
Okay. I was covering the mic, I think. Oh, sorry. I apologize.
we have one more round of bond funding of about $1 billion more that will be coming out shortly, but very excited about this increased capacity across the state. And on our website, you can see where the facilities, the awards at the facilities, the type of facilities are expected, a number of beds and slots as a result of this. But pretty excited about just the tremendous team effort to move so quickly to get these dollars out to our communities because we know there is a significant need. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to dig in on the housing intervention.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn Sang. I'm the policy advisor for homelessness and housing at the Department of Healthcare Services. So first of all, thank you all so much. I get to sit in on these meetings. So it's an honor and a privilege to come and speak to you a little bit about one of our major programs that's about to go live, which is the Behavioral Health Services Act, housing interventions, as was alluded to by Secretary Johnson and Director Boss. Before I begin, I like to just kind of lead in with, our thing right now is housing for health. So what does housing for health mean? And the way I like to crystallize it is through an example, a real life example of a member that I spoke with, and let's just call this member Jane, right? So Jane lived in a studio apartment on her own. Jane is diabetic. One of many Californians just living on the edge. And Jane sustained an injury at work, couldn't keep up with her employment, lost her income. So Jane fell into homelessness. It started off with couch surfing with family members and friends. And those of you who are familiar with how that typically goes, it's not very permanent and it's very short term and tenuous at best. So Jane eventually took her car, lived in her car. Car got swept off the street by the city. So Jane ended up living roughly on the streets. Go back to how I mentioned Jane was diabetic. So because she lost her apartment, she lost her refrigerator, so she lost the ability to effectively manage her diabetes or her insulin management, basically. Jane resorted to what many do on the streets, which is survival instincts, right? So when she actually did have insulin, she was digging holes in the ground, maybe storing it through a cooler that she found. It's kind of like what we call poor health choices, but those kind of choices aren't really choices. Those are things forced upon her because she lost her housing. Sticking with this, Jane started developing a lot of pain. And we suspect that this was diabetic neuropathy. It's a fancy way of saying very severe nerve pain. And Jane started resorting to things that she would come into to relieve the pain on the street. A lot of that was opioids, fentanyl, you name it, whatever you come into on the streets. And I think she couldn't even tell me exactly what she was taking, only that it just helped her escape. So when we talk about housing for health, we talk about how could we have better treated Jane's diabetes? And how can we have better start treating her substance use disorders that she developed while on the street? She actually got, and that's one thing I want to emphasize, she developed that as she exited to the street. And it could have been something as simple as prescribing her some housing. If she had a refrigerator, she could better store her insulin. If she had housing, she could have focused on ensuring she got to, keeping up with her prescriptions, refilling her insulin. But instead, she lacked access for that. She lacked the ability for transportation, and she was mostly just worried about where her next meal is going to come from or how to stay warm in the cold weather. So that all said, our department, Department of Healthcare Services, when we say housing for health, we mean that underscored 3 times. And through the last several years, we've really embarked on several investments that have been alluded to here through behavioral health bridge housing, which is a $1.5 billion program. CalAIM, that was mentioned as well, that's offered through a Medi-Cal managed care plans. And now we have the advent of transitional rent, which went live for the behavioral health population of focus as of 1/1/26 this year. And then also what I am going to focus us in on today, which is the Behavioral Health Services Act housing interventions, which I'll get into the nitty gritty on that a little bit, but that goes live July 1st of 2026 this year. So all that to say is when we say housing for health, again, we look at this as like, yeah, we have a strong piece to the puzzle when it comes to homelessness. And while our lens is through how are we improving someone's health outcomes, we are very much, a piece to the puzzle in the bigger picture of things. So I'm going to really focus us in on the 30% housing interventions and what that is. So the 30% housing interventions, this is delivered through county behavioral health agencies. And within this 30% bucket, I got another pie for you. So 50% of that 30% is focused on those who are chronically homeless and those living in encampments. 25% of that 30% bucket may also be used for capital development projects such as like constructing or rehabilitating housing as well. Now I'll get into that in a little bit more. So again, what I think the thing to point out with this 30% bucket is that, this is all funded through BHSA, which is funded through Prop 1, which was a voter initiative, and it's funded through what we call like the millionaire's tax. So it's a roundabout way of saying this is an ongoing source of funding that is through this tax. So housing interventions components. So for us, again, we are looking at ways to really lean into like how are we improving someone's health through housing. So our priorities are to reduce homelessness for individuals with significant behavioral health conditions, support permanent supportive housing models, through low barrier approaches and housing first principles, and also, aligning with local and statewide homelessness strategies while giving counties flexibility to innovate as well too. So again, we imagine these funds to be infused in communities and used in a braided fashion in ways that maximize this funding source and used in conjunction with others and with like local partners alike. So who's eligible for this program? So BHSA, it targets individuals with, serious mental health conditions, substance use disorders, and then for housing interventions also falls under the definition of experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, or chronically homeless as well too. And then when we talk about the definitions of homelessness, as a department, again, we did our best to align with kind of like what's already out there with the HUD definitions. I will note we did make a couple of minor modifications for purposes of allowing for more flexibility. I know we heard loud and clear from our stakeholders, which all of this was designed in conjunction with from the field. How can we build in some more flexibility so maybe it's not as so stringent as sometimes the HUD definition allows for. So again, also too, we aligned our definitions with how, on the CalAIM side and our housing related community supports, for example, we wanted to ensure alignment across eligibility criteria as well too. So what are housing interventions, right? So this is what can it be spent on? So counties may fund, what I'll say first is rental subsidies. Again, when we talk about housing, we often talk about the lack of affordable housing, but we also talk about the lack of available rental subsidies. So, again, I mentioned transitional rent that's offered through our managed care plans, and that's required benefit through managed care. But then also on the BHSA side, we have this ongoing source of funding where counties they have an opportunity to spend and use this source of funding for ongoing rental subsidies to the extent that they can offer it through their own allocations that they receive through here as well. In addition to rental subsidies, housing interventions can also be spent on operating subsidies, landlord outreach, participant assistance, and other types of outreach and engagement approaches. When we built out what the allowable expenditures are for housing interventions, we really try to be as expansive as we can, because the goal for BHSA and a guiding principle is that this is, think of it as like a gap filler or a backstop of sorts. Where can these funds be plugged and played at that fills needs within each community? So again, I also probably should have mentioned like capital development again is also another use for housing interventions to up to 25%. I'm going to spend a little time on this slide just to describe like what are operating expenses. Sometimes that means different things for folks, but operating expenses, those are costs associated with like the day-to-day physical operation of operating like projects. So like utilities, maintenance and repairs, marketing and leasing costs as well, property management, things like that that go into like a natural like operating cost to run like a permanent supportive housing unit, for example. Other things like landlord outreach and mitigation funds. So what does that mean? Well, when we talk about landlord outreach, it's just that, right? So a lot of times you have housing programs you have folks who are out there to build a portfolio of units. So how do we incentivize landlords to maybe preserve a unit for an individual? Any kind of presentations or for example, that might be used to educate landlords on the services and the funding as well too. Other outreach materials, campaigns, or also sometimes landlords want some assurances that if damages are done to their property, that it's paid for as well. So again, these are just some examples of allowable expenditures. The other thing too I want to mention is housing interventions may also be used to establish what we call participant assistance funds. So it's how do we get individuals to accept housing too? So my favorite example is pet deposits or pet fees. We often, I don't know how many times we've seen individuals describe they can't accept housing because they won't accept their pets. And we know through experience and research and studies that those kinds of things and those connections are very meaningful. So being able to pay for those like pet deposits, pet fees, housing application fees, security deposits, housing application fees, all the other little costs that add up for individuals that's needed to obtain housing as well. So allowable settings. So I'm going to cover where BHSA housing interventions may be used and what are our allowable settings. And I'm going to distinguish between permanent and interim settings. So the permanent settings, this is an exhaustive list. We do want to prioritize housing interventions for like permanent solutions, as this is ongoing source of funding as well too. So supportive housing, apartments, including master leased units, single family homes, recovery housing, also assisted care facilities as well. I'll also note here too, because I heard earlier about uses in sober living homes, sober or recovery residences. It's also an allowable use there too. And when we talk about capital development, or also through, I don't have a slide for it, but our behavioral health bridge housing program, those funding sources can also pay for those sober living residences as well too. So I wanted to just flag that because I heard it earlier and it just stuck out to me. So just again, these are funds that we're trying to like really build out the continuum and really fill a lot of gaps in our system. Oops, excuse me. All right, interim settings. Hotels, motels, we know with behavioral health populations, sometimes they're not ready to enter into like a permanent apartment, and they would benefit from a short-term stay in like a hotel, motel, or tiny home, or different kinds of like maybe non-congregate or certain congregate settings that have small numbers of individuals per room. This also may be used in recuperative care settings or short-term post-hospitalization housing settings as well. So again, we try to be as expansive as possible on where housing interventions can be used. But a key driver was to allow flexibility for our county partners to innovate, create different housing models. I think you see tiny homes, for example, listed on both permanent and interim settings. I raise that because sometimes we associate tiny homes with just interim settings, but in a lot of rural or frontier communities, we're also seeing like discussions or across state like innovations of tiny home villages. I've seen tiny home villages that have its own like bathroom and kitchenette, and it creates and it innovates models. So the goal again is not to limit, the innovation at local levels, which is happening, and a lot of creativity being done. So again, we try to be as expansive as possible with our allowable settings. And sorry, last thing on the allowable settings. For interim settings, we do cap the time limit someone may spend in the interim setting under BHSA to 12 months as well. So capital development, counties again may use up to 25% of housing intervention funds for capital projects. So what does this mean? This could be fully supporting the build out of a permanent supportive housing unit, or it could also be to help fund certain parts and fill gaps in permanent supportive housing as well too. We recognize that permanent supportive housing, it's a concrete, true and tried method of housing someone, an individual, and helping someone along their housing journey maintain permanency as well. So again, another eligible use and with a priority on permanent supportive housing developments too. So with that, I covered that pretty quickly. Questions or Megan?
Glenn, I know it wasn't the topic of your presentation, but can you just talk about transitional rent just a little bit more since it's new and hot off the presses in January?
Yeah, happy to. So transitional rent, it's a Medi-Cal benefit delivered through our Medi-Cal managed care plans. Transitional rent, it's 6 months of rental assistance. Before anyone asks, that's as much as we could get as 6 months from our federal partners. It went live on 1/1/26 for the behavioral health population of focus. The reason why we chose the behavioral health population of focus for mandatory launch was for it to align with these BHSA housing interventions as well too. So we expect like unprecedented levels of coordination between our plan partners and our county behavioral health partners to really look at like, all right, plans, I have 6 months of transitional rent. How can I make a warm handoff to perhaps the BHSA housing interventions for a longer term subsidy? On top of that too, we charge our plans with overall care coordination for members, and we're often serving the same members. I think a lot of times what we see in our systems is that maybe counties may be over-serving a member when services are available through the plan. But transitional rent, it's the first community support that is really like a mandatory benefit, and that's offered statewide now as of 1/1/26 in all counties by all plans. So that one is required.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Dr. Boss. Want to move into just we have a few minutes for discussion. I know that was a question or an elaboration for transitional rent, but want to open it up to the council for any questions or comments, thoughts, particularly for Councilmember Lewis, Councilmember Kuchel, who's joined us virtually, just sort of how you're hearing these things being implemented in communities, how service providers are sort of like where any opportunities may exist for the state to support implementation of these initiatives. And we'll start first with Councilmember Lewis.
Thanks to all the presenters. Really exciting work that's being done, and the continued effort to fully and thoughtfully integrate behavioral health and homeless and housing supports, I think is critical. And looking forward to seeing what our community capacity looks like in the next couple of years as a result of all this, right? To really be able to serve folks attached to care courts or otherwise, right? I think it's really important. I do have a question, but just overarching, I think that obviously there's very levels of capacity and around the state, around how to really tie these dollars or have these dollars complement other dollars, especially in the face of some of the contraction. I know that there's a very specific population this is serving, but the reality is there's a lot of folks that are being served in the respective communities that would be eligible for this. And so wondering what kind of support DHCS and other folks are providing to really provide spaces for jurisdictions across the state to have those conversations. Because again, some are further ahead than others and thinking about how to look at the entire portfolio of housing, behavioral health and behavioral health housing integrated care. And I don't know that all the different counties understand how to build out a full system that'll make, where there's no duplication, no double dipping, but that really maximizes all of the different dollars. And so can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Or, I think it's an opportunity if you're not doing it already.
This is the first time we're doing this. Sorry. This is the first time that counties are required to do these integrated plans, and continuums of care are supposed to be at the table as county behavioral health departments develop these integrated plans. They are due to the department, a draft version in March. Because these new plans go live in July. And so it is through these kind of local discussions, local planning process where those topics, that our goal is for where those are where the places where those topics will be discussed. We know that this is going to get better and better over time. This is the first time county behavioral health is responsible for pulling all of this together. And so as part of the integrated plan, we are checking that county behavioral health have engaged with all of the required stakeholders that are part of this process. And it's defined in statute on who they must engage with. And so through that process, it's going to be that is the table, and through the annual update for their integrated plans where these conversations are going to happen. And so, we are providing lots of technical assistance, lots of webinars, lots of materials to help in that process. But this is, they're in the midst of it right now, getting ready for July.
Okay, I was going to ask about technical assistance. So I know you all did with B-CHIP and a lot of the other initiatives, there was like actual marketplace where they can access like direct TA. Are counties able to pull from and get
There's similar resources,
okay.
Not as robust as the path under CalAIM, but very similar. We've engaged with different contractors to provide both kind of written materials and also webinars for both counties and providers in this space on how to engage and how to think about this. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and has
On
the
our
state
website.
pulled different regions across the state together to have conversations? Because sometimes in this kind of thing, in this kind of environment, it's helpful for them to hear with one another. And I'm not trying to be disparaging, but some regions are going to be a little bit more sophisticated in terms of really fully trying to bring everybody to the table and incorporating all those perspectives, I'll say it that way, into what the final plan is. And so some are going to be more thoughtful about it than others. And so are there any opportunities to bring different regions together?
So we have not convened. I think some other groups are thinking about that, but it's going to be, this is the first time through. What are the lessons learned, best practices, and then building on that for the future.
Okay.
Can I add to that? Do you mind? Not for nothing also, we also have another separate adjacent initiative, which is our flexible housing subsidy pools. So while it doesn't cover all 58 counties, these are counties who signed up voluntarily. And we have about 13 local teams mixed of big, large counties to your frontier counties. So through that avenue as well too, we get a lot of feedback from the field, which is important to us. So we have like a cohort of like the INYO counties, for example, the smaller counties who give us feedback on what housing looks like in their areas and what it takes to get these programs like transitional rent and BHSA off the ground, and how do we combine it with behavioral health bridge housing. But then we also hear from like our Alamedas or Sacramentos, for example, too, who give us like feedback, but tailored to their communities too. So that's like one method in which we offer technical assistance, but also how we deploy these resources and just like make them come to life in a way where they're working together and not in competition with each other. But also we hold, various office hours with all of our county behavioral health partners too. And we, I think what I can say about our department is we are very serious about the feedback we get, and we try to ensure our policies are reflective of the field. So through various methods, we do that as well.
I appreciate that. Last thing, last thing separate, moving along, but I was gonna say, like, I would imagine that these conversations are gonna bring up some potential policies that need to be looked at in other state departments. So I'm really glad to hear you all are considering adjustments to those. So more specific question related to the housing interventions initiative. This is my first time hearing about it. Just like, is it still like a formula by population or whatever that the distribution to the different counties is being decided? Like how are the distributions being calculated or decided in terms of what goes to the respective counties?
Yeah, so the Behavioral Health Services Act, 90% of those dollars by formula go to counties based on kind of behavioral health needs. It's not based on, it is kind of the traditional formula that has been used under kind of first Proposition 63. I mean, it is kind of a formula that is used to allocate dollars for behavioral health purposes. And so that formula is used to, and then from that of a county's pot.
Okay. I said that was my last question, but I have one more. Because when you just said that brought to mind for me, I know that, and I appreciate the note about this being the fastest deployment, right? Because we understand how critical these dollars are. With that said, we know that there have been some challenges, right? Just because of the pace for some other local jurisdictions of actually fully expending. And so is there a process that underspend or, even for projects that were funded, like under BCHIP and other things that have significant underspend? Like how's the state dealing with that? Because there's underspend and then there's other things that, so how are you all dealing with the underspend as a result of the pace of the rollout and some of the jurisdictions not having significant underspend?
So there's kind of two pots of dollars, the bond dollars, which are awarded, and that's the 6.4 billion. And those are awarded based on kind of bond round 1 and 2, and then dollars at the other agencies. And so those are based on awards. And if a project rescinds or relinquishes those dollars, they will get assessed at the next round of awards. That's traditionally how we've done it. The housing intervention dollars, those are dollars under the Behavioral Health Services Act that go to the counties, and counties have, there's prescribed periods by which they need to spend those dollars, and then it reverts, or it can go to their prudent reserve. And there are rules around how those local dollars then can either be kind of reclaimed by the state or maintained by the locals, depending on their prudent reserve. So there's different rules for the different pots of dollars.
Director Velasquez.
Thank you. First, Director and Glenn, thank you so much for the overview. This is extremely helpful. I get always calls with questions about this 30% housing intervention. And so this is incredibly helpful for me to see. There's a lot of questions like Councilmember Lewis that I have. It definitely deserves a deeper dive. But something that caught my eye from the slides was something that, quite frankly, I would, it strikes me as, just to put it bluntly, like a statutory loophole. And one of your slides had that there is an opportunity for maybe counties to decide to shift partly the 30% interventions to housing interventions to other areas. And, going, just seeing the list of eligible expenses, just on rental subsidies, for example, just with all the threat that we're facing on the rental subsidies and emergency vouchers, for example, so many other things that are being threatened at the moment. I just can't imagine a world in which local jurisdictions, counties don't have the ability to meet, at the very least, that 30%. So does the state get the ability to decide whether those shifts occurred?
So pursuant to SB 326, so this is in statute that counties are allowed to shift up to 7% of the dollars between the pots. They must request that to the department. It's all part of the integrated plan. It's a very transparent process, which will all be posted, and the entire public will know how those dollars are being used. But that is part of the process, and they do need to justify it, but it is required under statute to allow that.
Yeah, and we're also looking at what exemptions look like for smaller counties who may not be able to spend the full 30%. I don't want to get ahead and just say that they can't, but there are certain exemptions for smaller counties where 30% may represent, a lot in their communities, and perhaps it needs to be shifted to like more of the services component, for example, too.
And to the point raised, 7% from another pot could go into housing as well. So it could go up to 37%.
Likewise, yeah. Also want to raise a note because Megan asked me about it. HMIS entry is a required component of the housing interventions too, and pursuant to state law as well. So we are working with more technical assistance that's forthcoming on how to build out those project entries into HMIS as well. So that data is being captured.
I just want to acknowledge Dr. Kuchel's had her virtual hand up, so we'll give her a minute and then we will pivot to the room.
Thanks so much. Really fascinating and fantastic and exciting. A couple of questions. Is there guidance on the proportion in terms of the housing for interim versus permanent? Is there guidance on the proportion that can be spent for sort of tiny homes or things other than traditional homes? And is there a requirement that, two more questions, that people have a behavioral health need? Because obviously a lot of homelessness does not actually meet that definition. And then finally, I had one more thing oh yes, can any of it be used to supplant existing funding or for ongoing projects? A lot of places are worried about sort of home key projects running out of ongoing funding. Could this be used for operational costs and rent and things for that? And at what point can it be used to supplant locally funded initiatives?
Do my best to remember all three questions. The first question I think was, do we prescribe a limit or a capped amount on like tiny homes, for example? The answer is no. We only prescribe a time limit in interim settings because we are, the goal of this is to really prioritize permanency for our behavioral health members and recognizing that as a solution for them. So the time limit is, to be a little bit more specific, it's 12 months in an interim setting, but if they are using like transitional rent, for example, so any combination of, let's say, 6 months of rent, then they can get 6 months of interim setting under a housing intervention under BHSA. It could be 3 months of transitional rent, and then that could be 9 months of BHSA. All that to say is any combination of those two cannot exceed 12 months in an interim setting.
So for an individual, so a county couldn't put the money into interim to support their ongoing sort of interim needs. Like all 30% couldn't go to interim. It's sort of money follows the person is what you're saying, I think.
So we are the interim setting, it's kind of, I think the county would be informed by their community planning process and where to invest those dollars. But it's not meant to prioritize interim settings per se.
Okay.
They could split.
They have to, I don't think we prescribe necessarily what a shift or a share between interim and permanent is. We don't prescribe that specifically.
But it's all described in the integrated plan, how they plan to use the dollar. So it's very clear to kind of the community on how they're using these dollars.
Yeah. The other question about can it be used to supplant other funding services, it's not the intention of it, but it can fill gaps, like I said. So if we lose permanent supportive housing funding through whatever is going on with the HUD COC, NOFOS, et cetera, it could be used to backfill those. One example I raise is in permanent supportive housing units. It could be used, there's services that can be provided in there, or even CalAIM services can be provided in there. The one thing it cannot supplant is the use of Medi-Cal dollars. So Medi-Cal is actually on first, with BHSA housing interventions being a backstop. So it really places our managed care plans front and center to use. We want to leverage the Medi-Cal first, and that's built into our statute as well too.
And do counties have to show that the dollars are used for people with behavioral health disabilities, or if they don't have a disability but are homeless, can the dollars be used for them?
This is only for individuals with behavioral health needs.
Okay, thank you.
Conditions, yes.
So your SMI, SUD, SED, for example.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I'm so sorry, Deputy Secretary Herrera.
Thanks for the breakdown, Director Boss and Glenn. Really appreciate it. This is a section of BHSA that I think is, among them all, a little nebulous, and To Director Lewis's point, I just want to echo, the strong need for coordination with counties regarding what is going into their plans. Because a lot of the questions which, Margaret, you just asked, and they're dependent upon what the county is going to put in their plan as to how that, and that's my understanding of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But how that all those services that are eligible for funding within any pot, whether it's FSP or housing interventions or BHSS, that they're dependent on that integrated plan development. And when you run into, there's even certain things also with our Home Key program, Director Velasquez, that there's a when HCD through Home Key NOFA says operational subsidies, and this section within BHSA in housing interventions operational subsidies. On the Home Key side, we allow for the funding of supportive services, as where in housing interventions that is not the case. So, and that's one question that we keep getting back as to, are these the same? Are they different? So I just want to clarify that for the group that within the Home Key side, operational subsidies that support supportive services, as where with BHSA, that's not the case.
That's correct, right? The housing intervention, that 30% is not to include services. There are other pots of dollars for those services. This is truly housing.
So with that, I'm just saying, like when we have, our counties who are eligible applicants for Home Key, and counties that are the ones developing their integrated plans, the necessity to make sure that everyone is read in with applicable technical assistance, which I know Healthcare Services is doing their very best to put out. It's paramount. And if it's, at the annual review time, where we learn these lessons, or if there are lessons learned to improve that process, then, then fantastic. But I just wanted to flag that is something that is, that we get a lot of questions about. And I just wanted to lift that up for the group. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. And I think one thing I'd say about the community planning process, we actually built in statute who counties have to work with to inform their integrated plan. That includes like clients, consumers, families. Sorry, I looked it up while you were talking. And social services, education, veteran, law enforcement, also like, as Michelle mentioned, COCs as well too. We expect counties to be in their community doing landscape assessments, where are the needs to where we invest these dollars, so it's not invested in a siloed fashion. To the point about services, there is a separate spending bucket under BHSA that is supposed to be used for services. But on top of that too, one thing we're trying to keep spreading the awareness on is through CalAIM. A lot of those services are there under Medi-Cal. A lot of like the supportive services you find in PSH units. When we talk about potential losses of funding for PSH units, we lift that up as one quick example of where CalAIM could step in and fund the services. And we've seen examples in communities for providers, owner operators who are really embedding these sources really well. And the BHSA is meant to complement that as well too. So.
And if I can just add, similarly to the community planning process for these initiatives, HAP also required a strikingly similar by design planning process for their regional homeless action plans. Those dollars, of course, are accessible to big cities, counties, and continuums of care. Not often is it true that if I'm a county department who is the eligible HAP recipient, I am also the behavioral health department or county provider for behavioral health services. But the expectation is that they know who that person is and are talking about, these are my dollars, those are your dollars. How are we bringing them together to serve, persons in our community? So, any final, Councilmember Lewis.
Okay. Two brief questions. I have one additional one based on the comment. So are the integration plans, because in an ideal world, all of the services dollars will be neatly matched to all of the capital projects. That is not the reality. And so unfortunately, and it's causing all kinds of, it's causing all kinds of challenges. And so do the integration plans include all of the funding, both from the capital development side and the service dollar side, or is it primarily based on the capital side of things?
So when you say capital, do you mean part of the 30% housing intervention? That's all that's governed in terms of the capital. I know that there's other capital investments outside of the behavioral health space, but it is just so this is dollars to our county behavioral health departments, not kind of the broad housing.
That's what
kind
I'm directly referring to the behavioral health
So of the
dollars.
30% and the 25% with
Yeah.
what, I mean, it's kind of how they plan for it and what they want. There's so many different funding sources that they may have
Right.
for that and how they plan for that.
Is there any encouragement or guidance from the state to make sure that, again, we're matching that the local jurisdictions try to ensure that if there's a capital project being developed over here, that they find a way to tie in service dollars as well? Because again, that seems to be a gap.
So I think it is dependent on kind of when you say capital project, what you mean.
Yeah.
If it is just the BHSA,
I'm only talking about, I promise I'm on subject. I'm only talking about the BHSA realm of things.
The B-chip project,
Mhm.
what you're asking if the plan has to show how that's gonna be.
Yes.
So B-CHIP is residential and treatment facilities. And so Medi-Cal will essentially be covering those services. But like a lot of the permanent supportive housing projects, that is a little bit, I think, a broader conversation
Yeah.
than just what is governed under this BHSA county integrated plan.
Okay, well, even if it's not in the county integrated plan, I want to offer that at the state level. I think some conversation around all the different projects that are meant to get people off the street and keep them off the street that also have behavioral health needs, that we try to figure out how to bridge the gap, provide some guidance, or have some requirements in place so that we don't find ourselves with increasing numbers of projects that can't really launch because there's missing.
And
There's
that's the
funding
goal of
gaps.
having the continuums of care at the table, is to start having those conversations together.
Okay.
Also,
People like Veronica Lewis too.
Yeah, invite me to the table. I'll be there, but there's some gaps, and I hope that we can have further conversation around. It's not just it's a local jurisdiction thing. It really, and it's not unique to Los Angeles, as you know where I come from. And so hopefully there can be some conversation around what does that look like. I think the discretion is really important at the local level. And at the same time, we are seeing some of the inadvertent outcomes of having one part of projects funded differently than in other parts, and it's not necessarily resulting in, I think, what the intended outcome was. And so I hope that we can have some conversations at the state level about how to set some parameters and provide some guidance to the local jurisdiction. So the other two questions are very simple. What is the maximum number of months for permanent housing rental assistance? I know you said 12 months for interim, but if you could share that. And then the other question is, what is the timeline? I'm really excited about HMIS, right? But what's the timeline for HMIS to be connected? I know that this project, the Interventions project, is supposed to launch in July. So is HMIS also going to be entered into in July, or is it like a phased-in approach?
TBD on the HMIS. We're currently working with our consultants and partners to help us build out the project instructions. That work is starting this year currently. You had another question I forgot. I'm sorry.
There's no
Maximum
time
time in
limit on
permanent
the
housing.
permanent.
There's no time limit on permanent settings. We don't specify that. Again, there's a certain degree of the counties are determining that, but as well, we want to see it maximized with other resources as well too. But the other point, just wanted to lift up as well, like how these services and dollars are integrated with other projects. There are learning communities that our department is engaged in. So we have a learning community full of like developers who are curious about these services and how to embed them. So like our partners at UC Berkeley, for example, they have a learning community and putting out a lot of fantastic guidance on how certain providers throughout California are embedding these services, not just BHSA and CalAIM, but also with HAP and other dollars across our various departments as well too. So a lot of that is happening, but we are making progress towards like really forcing integration, and through our community planning process, we are forcing our counties to reach out to these folks too. So that is very paramount to us, that these dollars are accounted for and spent in communities wisely.
I will just say, in terms of the state coordination that happens, sometimes behind the scenes, we've, showcased our HAP dashboards, our ERF dashboards, to all of our council member departments, but also to other state entities who have interest in this area. So, I serve on the Behavioral Health Task Force that's overseen by Cal HHS, and the conversations with Deputy Secretary Welsh around this county is saying we have $0 left or negative dollars left in behavioral health, but we know there's X dollars left in HAP. And how can those two departments, those two services meet in the middle and begin to talk about how you serve the whole person, from a community perspective. So, but with that, I know Director Velasquez, did you still have, nope, he's great. Okay, I covered all the points he was going to say.
I just wanted to make a clarifying point, because I think some of what I'm hearing from Councilmember Lewis is about maybe the learning communities you just talked about, Glenn, of we'd love to sort of expand and make sure that the stakeholders that we interact with at our agency and that may not be as aligned with some of the health related stuff are going to those, because we have sponsors and community members who are serving people with behavioral health issues in housing. And if it's not the 30% pot, that's cool. But like, where else should they be going to make sure that they have services tied to the capital investments of permanent supportive housing? That is the fundamental challenge that we have seen for decades. And if it's the ultimate goal is that the continuum is serving the folks with behavioral health needs, we want to just make sure that our housers and other stakeholders know where to go. And I think some of it is the tool, Megan, that you all highlighted, that kind of looks at all of our member agencies and departments and where those resources are. But I think that's where I'm curious about how we can better understand where we should be directing those folks to the right pots of opportunities and resources across the full BHSA spectrum.
And I would just to kind of maybe a point of clarification, BHSA is kind of governing the BHSA dollars. Medi-Cal is an entitlement. So individuals are entitled for those dollars. And I think it's the different ways of how this get financed from a project basis versus an individual basis, because that an individual who qualifies for Medi-Cal and needs those services, it's an entitlement and they should be getting those services. So I think there's a distinction, a little bit of like project-based versus actually a person being eligible and should be getting those services.
So those folks coming through Cal or going through Medi-Cal.
Correct.
Should be, and that's part of what I'm saying. We want our sponsors to make sure and they're getting everybody on Medi-Cal, like that they're partner, so that if that's where the person gets the support's excellent. But then if there's other places where they need to go, that's not individual specific, but can apply to housing supports outside of their Medi-Cal, but they have to be on Medi-Cal. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I think it's part of I think my understanding is kind of project-based funding versus individual-based funding. And the individual is eligible for Medi-Cal and is entitled to those services.
And if I can just add a little bit to that, this sort of came up in the hearing and had subsequent conversation with partners at CDSS. When we talk about entitlements, you are entitled to that thing that is your thing, regardless of your county having a service provider who can administer those things. You still must receive those things from somebody. Versus what we're talking about in Home Key, the eligibility criteria is not dependent on receipt of Medi-Cal, receipt of CalFresh, receipt of CalWorks. And so I think where Cal ICH can be helpful is making those distinctions, particularly when we talk about dashboards for 799. It's not a light comparison to say something that serves a person who is a Medi-Cal recipient, has a severe mental illness or functional impairment, Compare that to a family who's receiving cash assistance, for example. So I think some of this will be helped by making that very clear in a dashboard. But just wanted to acknowledge this is something that we've heard not just from the legislature, we've heard this from system partners as a whole. And I don't know that she's still on with us, but most recently talked with Roxanne Wilson, who's a director of homeless services for Monterey County. They're not an integrated health and human services community, meaning that she has directors who are her counterparts for behavioral health, for human assistance, for adult protective services, child protective services. Each one of those directors has a budget that is supported by programs that are being administered in this room. And having that conversation as a county, just county administrators, is challenging in some communities. Yes.
Just want to into this a little bit more. I feel like that there's a difference project-based versus the individual. I think also helping at the local level, not only apply for Medi-Cal, but what are those entitlements? Because myself, if I were a Medi-Cal recipient, I wouldn't know what all those entitlements are. And so making that coordination, it still is a gap, especially when we think about population specific embedding and ensuring that those communities are brought when it comes to both pieces and integrating it more. And I know we're getting closer and the intention is that, but it also happens in rural communities as well, where I can just give an example where the communities of practice or the continuum of care players at the table, tribes are still left out, or certain populations at the local level. So really intensifying that expectation. I don't know all the details because I haven't been at the table very long, but just ensuring that coordination, and then the communities of practice, or I don't know what you called it, your partners, or you gave Berkeley as an example. Just if there are models or counties that are doing it and coordinating better, using those and leaning in, where they're building in those populations at the front end and demonstrating how to braid that behind the scenes. So at the end of the day, the individuals, they don't know, we all know they don't know this from that, or project-based versus that. How do we make that connection more so we don't create an unintentional continued gap?
I want to give Glenn just 1 second to wrap up. We do have one more agenda item under council member department updates. So any final questions for Glenn before he leaves us with some very helpful resources on the screen? Great.
Oh, all right. So any and all information you need on these services, they live on our Housing for Health website that we set up, or behavioral health transformation website as well. Any questions on behavioral health transformations or inbox information? So, again, we're taking as much feedback as we can to respond to. So thank you all for your time and for having me. It's been a pleasure sharing these resources today.
For those of you with motion sickness, please don't look at the screen. All right, last on our agenda today, we will hear from our fantastic hosts at Calvet and their partner at RAND. But I do just want to give Deputy Secretary Herrera a moment to make an introduction before we call your partner to the stage.
Yeah, that'd be, thank you so much, again, for the council for accepting our invitation to host. Just so everyone's aware, this big American flag is the battle flag of the USS California, which was at Pearl Harbor, was sunk, and then risen to continue to fight in the war years later, and then was decommissioned in 1946. And I bring that up in particular just because, when we think about veterans who are high in age, I think many of us think about our World War II veterans, our Korean veterans, our Vietnam veterans. And one thing that always seems to get missed is, the war on terror, especially, even going back to Desert Storm, and those operations were in, the early 90s. And, the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq and subsequently Afghanistan were, 2003. So, you have veterans from our most recent wars who are potentially upwards to their high 60s. And when we talk about homelessness and individuals experiencing homelessness and providing stable supports for them once they make it through coordinated entry, and are actually now in a position to be stably housed, how are we making sure that they're being stably housed when they're at that high of age or potentially that high of acuity? And this is what this program is about, and we're happy to share it with you. And for the sake of time, I'll call up Amy Fairweather, who's the Director of Policy at Swords to Plowshares. Swords to Plowshares is the technical consultant on this program, which Calvet was able to put out in 2022. Is the first grant program that this department was able to run. So it's something that was a little bit of a bureaucratic nightmare to get off the ground, but very pleased and excited to present to you the fruits of that effort. And with that, Amy, take it away.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of you and Calvet for hosting and for always being really wonderful and supportive partners here in California. So here we go. I'm from Swords to Plowshares. That's Mayor Mike. He has lived in our housing for quite some time, and he's at one of our newest houses on Treasure Island. And he's Mayor Mike. You can't miss him. He's great. So let's go on here. Okay, so Swords to Plowshares started in 1974. I didn't, but Swords did. And, as years went on, obviously homelessness among veterans, grossly disproportionate levels of homelessness among veterans. They started to, address these issues. Swords actually started the first permanent supportive housing for veterans in the country in 2000, not a dime of VA money. But recognize the need for permanent supportive housing in community. Since then, HUD-VASH has been transformational. We now house 500 veterans in permanent supportive housing. We also have other transitional housing programs, mental health, legal services, really wraparound care. But what we started to notice in our day-to-day work and in our own lives is that we were looking at an aging population, and a high acuity population. And that doesn't mean that every single resident in our housing is high acuity and aging, although every single resident in our housing is disabled to some extent. Some are service connected with the VA, others are not. They're not eligible. All of them are disabled to some extent. Many of them multiple comorbidities, mental health, physical health, PTSD, SMI, anxiety, chronic homelessness. Yes, SED, I mentioned that. So a lot going on. So we're looking at this population. It's harder and harder to keep them stably housed so they can retain housing, age in place, where they didn't need a higher level of care, or just they decompensate, or their habitability is keeping them from remaining in that housing. No place for them to go. So how are we going to look at this? And we started to look to our partners to try and address these systems here about evictions, habitability, behavioral health, health decline falling faster than it could. We could prevent or mitigate. And to address these issues, we looked at our own services. We looked at our partners in CAVSA across the state, and knew that what we needed was to have more on-site supportive services. Now, HUD-VASH pays for the rent, although sometimes collecting rent can still be tough. But it does not pay for much of anything beyond property management and a skeleton staff of 24-hour monitors. And we know that these are people who need permanent supportive housing. They're not going to make it in the market. Nobody's going to rent to them. They need a mission-driven landlord, and they need these services, and they deserve these services. Because we want them to thrive. We want them to be healthy. We want that, that first home that they've maybe had in years or decades, that is probably going to be their last home, be a place that's dignified. So now, a lot of these issues are, would be relevant to many other populations. There are some wrinkles for veterans that are different in terms of many of them are not eligible for Medi-Cal based on their service-connected disability. We're trying to figure that out. There's ways that we can, help that. There are the HUD-VASH case managers, but they're just that. They're case managers. And they can connect to the medical system of the VA if the veteran in our housing is eligible for VA, because again, VA eligibility is not automatic and it is not universal. So, there's all these gaps. And Councilwoman Lewis, I just want to say, I was just behind you like, yeah, with everything you were saying, because the need to have stability in our staffing so that we can have those supports that are there. They're there for the long term so that we can take the risk of opening another permanent support housing. We have a new home care, Home Key Plus. We're so happy with that. We're looking at, decades and decades and decades. How are we going to support that? So we put together this proposal, and luckily the governor was great and got the money, and Calvet, our wonderful administrators of the money. And so we have these pilots, 3 years pilots, so it's limited funding around the state. Some are in, urban LA, others Nation's Finest. Sonoma County is a little bit more rural. They are all permanent supportive housing because we had to put an envelope around it. Sorry. Swords to Plowshares, in addition to operating it within our housing, I'm in the policy department and we act as the design technical assistance and process evaluator. And Rand, who's going to come up here in just a second, are the impact evaluators. So as I said, I think I, talked about, aging in place, addressing this community. I also want to shout out Dr. Kushel. We consulted you when we were designing it and had some questions, and, wonderful always to have your wisdom. And I know that the aging community is really dear to your heart. So these are all of the goals, which I think are pretty obvious. And then the other thing is, this isn't, while there are some clinical and medical opportunities for the pilots to have staffing, a lot of it is non-clinical and non-medical, but it's in community and it's on the housing site. Because the other thing about these people with behavioral health issues, long-term chronic homelessness, PTSD, is the difficulty entering into community, coming out of isolation and trusting anybody. So we were finding that our residents were much more likely to talk to a janitor than they were to their own case manager from the VA or to other staff. So seeing them on a regular basis is just really key to the whole design. And so I've been motor mouth here. We have this wonderful report here that you can look in it more deeply. We will also be convening all of the staff from all of the sites right here on April 15th. And we will have an opportunity for people to come and we're going to present. You can talk to some of the people who are actually providing the care to these veterans. So we'd love to have you there. And I will jump to Maya Buenaventura, who is with RAND. They are doing the impact evaluation, and she will get into the data collection and analysis.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. And thanks so much for having me today. I feel so honored to be here. As Amy said, I'm Maya Bonaventura. I am from RAND, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization in Santa Monica. And we are the independent evaluator of VSSR. All right, so this is just a little background on our evaluation. Our evaluation is tied to 5 primary questions. So we're looking at who does this program reach? Did they stay housed? Did things get better for them with respect to health, daily living? What helped the most of those services that Amy showed you? What's associated with actually better outcomes? And then what makes their lives feel good? Okay, so where does the data come from? So every day we have staff who are interacting with these veterans, and every quarter they fill out these assessments that tell us all sorts of things about their lives, what group activities are they participating in, how are they feeling, how's their health, do they have any substance use disorder issues, things like that. Then we have a veterans annual survey. So veterans are telling them in their own words once a year, how are you feeling? And then we have move out records. So this tells us if someone has moved out, what is the reason that they moved out? So on the bottom here, you'll see the 4 ways that we analyze this data. So we looked at a snapshot at entry. So what are the demographics and other things that we saw about these veterans before and after? So the 3 months before they enrolled, what did things look like for them? And then after enrolling, what did things look like for them? What's linked? That's what services are linked to which outcomes. And then quality of life drivers. So what are the things that are associated with veterans feeling higher quality of life? Okay, so here's that first question, who is the program serving? So of the 515 veterans that were enrolled, we saw over 3/4 age 56 or older. This is sort of in line with the national trend of aging veterans, but I wanted to know that there's veterans also in the 30s and 40s that have complex needs that are also part of this program. The vast majority identify as men, and then 85% were active duty veterans. And then you'll see here which military branches are represented. Army would be the highest represented branch, and then we see a diversity of racial and ethnic backgrounds. Okay, so we also looked at their health backgrounds upon entry. So people had pretty acute backgrounds. The highest reported categories were mostly mental health issues, actually, depression, anxiety, PTSD, but there were also physical health issues like hypertension, arthritis. You'll see this is a very acute population. About 60% reported fair, poor, or very poor health upon entry. 31% had 4 or more chronic conditions. 24% experienced a fall in the prior 3 months. And 16% had visited an ER in the prior 3 months. So this is a highly acute population, and this gives us kind of a good way to measure how things might have improved as they stayed enrolled in the program for longer. Okay, so perhaps the most important thing to look at is the negative housing exit rate. 3% is really low. I looked at another recent study on HUD-VASH, and I think the negative outcome rate there was like 9%. So in your reports, you'll see 2%. That's like slightly older data than what I'm reporting here. But that means only 3% exited to eviction, incarceration, or return to homelessness. This is just sort of the way exits happened over time. There's not any real reason for this peak other than it's just sort of follows the wave of enrollment. When there's like a big wave of enrollment, farther down the road, you'll see a big wave of exits. Okay, so this is pretty remarkable. So this is an aging population, yet we see that for those veterans for which we had 1 year of outcome data, we see massive improvements. 58% decline in falls, 71% decline in emergency medical visits, far fewer ambulance and 911 calls, far more people eating 3 or more meals a day, far fewer missed medical appointments, and then lower alcohol use. So this is all really good news. Okay, and then another thing we looked at was what about unmet needs for daily living assistance? So in the furthest left column, you'll see different categories of assistance that veterans needed. Then next to that, you'll see unmet need at enrollment. So for grocery shopping and errands, 24% of people said, I don't get that and I need it. After 1 year, only 6% said, I need that, but I don't get it. And then you'll see the change here in the far right column. And we see remarkable decreases across all these daily living assistance needs. The one thing to point out that might be room for improvement is housekeeping and managing household. There's still a bit of a need there. 14% said I need it, but I don't get it. Okay, group participation in social behavior was another area. We saw remarkable changes here as well. There was a threefold increase in residents participating in 3 or more group activities, 38% fewer residents with no group participation, and then a 200% growth in those attending 3 or more activities. There's a little caveat here at the bottom that you might not be able to read. Fewer people were leaving their apartments daily, but that's probably because they now leave for structured activities like group activities. They're not just sort of like leaving and wandering and looking for social activities. Okay, then another thing that I mentioned earlier was one of our research questions is, okay, so what leads to these better outcomes? We can't say definitively like what caused these things, but we could look at it for veterans who received a specific type of service in one quarter. What did their outcomes look like the next quarter? Okay, so for those who received ADL and IADL assistance, we actually see higher acute care use, but this is probably because it's the people with very complex needs that are getting ADL assistance, and then they also have higher acute care use. But then something that was also pretty remarkable was group program participation was statistically significant impact across the board. So people who participated in group activities had much higher rates of good or very good health, lower acute care use, fewer falls, and better social engagement. For habitability discussions, we didn't really see any statistically significant impacts the next quarter. Okay, and then earlier I mentioned that we also had this sort of annual survey of veteran quality of life. And then we asked them sort of, rate your quality of life, and then tell us about your health, your housing worry, your housing safety, your housing quality, and your feelings of loneliness. And so what we saw is here on the far left, better general health is not surprisingly associated with a much higher odds of a better quality of life. But it's not just a person's health that improves their quality of life. It's also their feelings of housing safety, not worrying about their housing every day, and not feeling lonely. So all of these things play into a person's quality of life. And then since I'm a researcher, I have to give you areas of caution and some caveats. So we saw an alcohol use decline, and that's great. We saw cannabis and opioid use rise reported. So that's probably an artifact of reporting. So for the staff who are filling out these quarterly assessments, they're getting to know veterans better. Veterans are disclosing things that they might have not disclosed before. And so it might look like an increase when it's truly just like more open conversations about these things. This is sort of supported by here at the very bottom on the left side, overall no substance use rate, overall substance use rate unchanged. So this supports the theory that likely we're not actually seeing veterans who are using cannabis and opioids at higher rates. They're just reporting things like that more. Let's see. Another thing you might notice in the report is primary care fell, mental health outpatient visits were down. But this might represent more of a rebalancing to specialized care or on-site care rather than like a disconnection from care that they need. Okay, so some takeaways overall, what does the evidence suggest? It suggests that the program is reaching the right people, a very acute population, that housing stability is being maintained, that remarkable 3% negative exit rates. Group engagement is a key driver of better outcomes later on. Housing security is very highly linked to quality of life. And then there's some unmet needs that persist. And then the one I mentioned earlier was that over 10% still lack housekeeping help that they need. And again, those caveats to keep in mind is this is purely descriptive, so we didn't have a control group. This isn't some kind of randomized control trial. And then I think another thing I mentioned is a lot of these outcomes are staff reported. So as staff get to know veterans better, they might be able to report more accurately. And then as far as being able to generalize these results, we're looking at veterans right now. So as the program goes on, things might be different for those veterans. And then we had no access to VA medical records as part of this evaluation. Okay, so to close, what are our next steps? So I'm reporting on the interim report that we submitted in January 2026. We're going to be getting more data, and then we're going to be doing another report that'll come out. I think we're turning it in the summer, so later on this year. And then we'll have more data so we can look at more subgroup analysis. We can kind of link services to those annual veteran surveys. And so a richer sort of description of the program outcomes will come out in August. Yeah, so that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. Before we open it up to the council, I saw the various branches of military and the differences in terms of accessing this program, or there was something around like the type of service that they needed. There was like a 20% difference between, I think, the Army, the Navy, and then the other branches. Curious if you have anything around why that would have been.
So we don't.
I mean, I can just say that the percentages of branch are the percentages of our clients and our housing. And some branches are much larger than others. The Army's huge, the Marines are much smaller. So it's not really connected to, I don't think,
So yeah, we were just describing the demographics of everybody who enrolled. And we actually haven't done that subgroup analysis yet. But as we get more data, when you have a small population, you can't really slice it up and look at subgroup analysis, but hopefully in this next round, we'll have more data and we can look at things like different branches. Yeah.
Thank you. I just was curious if it had anything to do with how folks are transitioned back into civilian life, but appreciate that it's more to do with the size of the branch.
Yeah, and I just add on to that. These breakouts for military branch and race and ethnicity do match generally with the breakouts of the military themselves. Army and Navy are the two largest branches, et cetera. So
thank you. Other Councilmember Lewis.
Great presentation. Thank you so much. And I look forward to looking at the full report. And the outcomes are amazing. Congratulations. In the detailed report, do you look at some of the different outcome indicators across by demographic to see if there's any variances?
That's one thing that we want to do. We wanted to wait until we had a fuller sample. So every reporting period, we got like a whole new group of people. And because we had a smaller sample, we couldn't find really anything statistically significant when we tried to do subgroup analysis, but we're hoping for that.
Okay, because I think that would be very informative if there are variances between demographics to help inform, continue to enhance the program design, but great presentation. Thank you.
Other council members? All right, well, seeing none, thank you both so much. And thank you again, Calvet. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
And with that, I will pass it to Giselle to facilitate public comment.
All right, thank you for hanging in there as we approach the end of this meeting. So we will now accept general public comment. Thank you for all your patience, and we appreciate the council members for listening to public comments as well. We welcome all comments and feedback. I would like to remind everybody that we are unable to discuss items that are not on the agenda for today's meeting. Additionally, due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions. If you have any specific questions for CalICH or the council, we ask that you please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. Everybody will get 2 minutes for their comment. A CalICH staff member will soon share their screen with a 2-minute countdown timer, and we will warn you when your time has expired. If you're connected through Zoom, select the raise hand icon in the meeting window of your computer, and we will unmute you to allow you to comment. For those joining us by telephone, you may press star 9 to indicate that you'd like to comment, and once I call on you, you'd be instructed to unmute yourself. For those joining us in person, I'd like to invite you to line up in the middle of the aisle. Apologies if there's a tight squeeze, and we will call on you to stand up to the podium to state your comment.
I don't believe we have anybody signed up for public comment in person, Giselle.
No public comment? Okay. Perfect. We will move on to virtual public comment. I will give it a minute to see if there are any hands raised. Currently, we have 2 hands raised. All right. Ruby T, you may voice your comment. Ruby, I asked you to unmute. You should be able to select unmute if you're able to.
I apologize. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, I could hear you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruby Toralva. Thank you for this time. And I'm an advocate for my family here in Kings County. I appreciate the council's work and the opportunity to listen to today's updates regarding behavioral health reform and interagency coordination on homelessness. However, respectfully, I want to raise concerns that relates directly to several of the agenda items discussed today, particularly the role of advisory bodies and the implementation of behavioral health services at the county level. Across California, we continue to build advisory committees, lived experience boards, and coordination structures. Yet many families still encounter the same fundamental problem, no clear point of accountability when the system fails. This is not just an isolated experience. It's not an individual here and an individual there. It's families here and everywhere in the country. We need your support because whenever we face problems, it's just barriers of navigating housing support, behavioral health services, and disability-related accommodations. In my own county, the Board of Supervisors approved March 2025 resolution tied to agreement number 21-10086, authorizing amendments to the county's mental health performance contract with the state. While the intent is to support program continuity, these agreements involve significant funding and responsibility for delivering behavioral health services for vulnerable populations. At the same time, DHCS audit of the Fresno Kings Madera Regional Health Authority, operating as Calviva Health, identified oversight gaps affecting Medi-Cal members. For example, the audit found that members whose ECM benefits were discontinued were not notified through the required notice of action process, meaning they were not informed to the right to appeal. The audit also found out delegate providers did not consistently deliver all required ECM services.
Ruby, we're going to give you 1 more minute on the time clock, but just want to let you know the 2 minutes has
Okay,
the first 2
I
minutes.
appreciate it. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Thank you. The purpose of the Interagency Council is to ensure that state departments work together to address homelessness, yet families experience fragmentation between agencies responsible for housing, health, behavioral, and social services. When responsibility is divided across multiple departments and advisory structures, accountability can become unclear. CDSS has multiple times told me they don't have jurisdiction over counties. I continue to read and inform myself and see that there is jurisdiction. Your council is to be able to advise these counties. Kings County needs a lot of help. As behavioral health reform and homelessness initiatives continue to expand, how will the state ensure that accountability mechanisms within county contracts and Medi-Cal managed care oversight are actually enforced? We have Calviva, that the audit shows that they had 19,000 people, members that supposedly they had given service. And this is according to the audits. And they only
Apologies, Ruby. Can you please wrap up your
1,000
comment?
people. So I just want to encourage you guys to please advise our county and the counties to be able to enforce your guys' jurisdiction. As CDSS and CalHHS directors are there, I please ask you to help out our counties to be educated and be trained. As Cal HCD also audits show that their people are not trained, and we just need to enforce this. If not, federal will continue to take away money from California or take everything, and everything will dissolve. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comment. We have Gregory Furon. Should be allowed to speak. You may voice your comment.
Greetings. First of all, thank you, Ruby. I support your comments. I'm a member of a local Sonoma County Behavioral Health Board. I'm a 78-year-old vet who was there in 1974 when Swords to Plowshares was birthed. Also went on to Vietnam Veterans of California and served for quite a while. I want to respond simply to the last speaker about VASH vouchers because I'm also on the Santa Rosa Housing Authority and we control the VASH vouchers as far as in partnership with the vets. But the problem seems to be communication to utilize all of the VASH vouchers in the partnership between the Vets Administration and our Housing Authority. I will be there on the 15th, and I hope to be able to try to figure out a way of getting a better an improvement in our distribution of VASH vouchers in partnership with the vets. You guys are doing a good job, all of you, and I really appreciate this presentation. I learned a lot, but we still have a ways to go to help vets who still need housing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, I see no more hands raised. I will turn it over to Megan for final remarks.
Thank you, Giselle. I'm not going to bother putting the PowerPoint back on the screen. We're at the conclusion of our agenda. I just want to thank you all so much for joining and in participating in a lively discussion on behavioral health reform. It is your passion and expertise that is really going to move the needle. So with that, the meeting is adjourned at 3:58 p.m. And to receive up-to-date information on our activities, please sign up on our email list on our council webpage. The next council meeting will be June 3rd, 2026, 1 to 4. I heard Calvet is super excited to have us back here again with parking passes. Thank you all so much.